Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. Sorry we were tardy. It's my fault. George was the consummate professional and here right on time. It was me who was chatting backstage and then was like, oh gosh, I better start. So welcome, Mr. George Jared, author and journalist. Welcome to the Ward Case Studies. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. All right. So let's get into it. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with just telling everybody how when you became involved in covering the case?
Sure. So I started covering the case in early 2008. I was working for the Jonesboro Sun, which is the largest newspaper in Jonesboro. It's the largest newspaper in the region where this case happened. And, I had worked for several different newspapers covering murder cases, and I've covered quite a few. I was kind of the low man on the totem pole there, though, because I had some experience. In fact, the most experienced reporter there had covered West Memphis 3 from day one. He was out there when the bodies were found. And so he had taken some vacation time or taken a hiatus. And there were 2 or 3 other reporters who would have been in line to do it. And they were covering different murder trials. And so they were all out of the office. So I get a phone call from my editor and she's like, hey, you want to cover West Memphis 3 tomorrow? We have one hearing. I said, okay. And so I hung up the phone and I was with a friend of mine and I said, what's the West Memphis 3? And then I went home that night, got on the internet. And then I remembered I'd seen the documentary Paradise Lost years before that. And I was like, okay, I think honestly in my mind, I'd assumed those guys had just gotten out of prison, Oh,
okay.
And but I did my research, that night. I went into court the next morning. It was about a 20-minute hearing. Dennis Reardon, Barry Bonds' attorney in the Balco steroids case.
Mm-hmm.
He was representing Damian Eccles at the time. He was there. I think Michael Burt was there, who was representing Miss Kelly, and then John Phillips Bourne, who was Jason Baldwin's attorney. They were there for this short hearing. The judge, it's so funny. They say that he didn't gag the case, but I was there in the courtroom that day. He gagged the case. He told them not to talk to any journalists or any media. And so I was riding the elevator. I ended up in an elevator with just me and Dennis Reardon.
Oh,
And
wow.
he said, we can't talk about this case, but maybe there's other things we can talk about. He kind of winked at me, and I was like, okay. And so he had a notepad, and he wrote down his personal cell phone number, and he handed it to me.
Oh, wow.
And so a little bit of time after that, the reporter who had been covering it for all that time, he no longer worked at our newspaper. And so my editor came to me and she said, I think we want you to cover this. And this was all the Rule 37 hearings for Jesse and Jason. And so this was going to be, a year and a half of, weeks at a time covering it. And so that's how I got my start. By the end of the process, I had written more news stories about the West Memphis Three than anybody in the world. Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky. I didn't know that. They actually told me that. They came into town and I would go around with them because I did stories with them too.
Oh, okay.
Filming Paradise Lost 3.
Oh, okay.
And so I was with them a lot. And I asked Bruce one time, I said, why are you guys always coming to my office talking to me? And he said, you've written about it more than anybody.
Wow.
And so I had no clue. And I think, like I told you, Jen, I have interviewed quite literally everybody connected to the case. Now there's some smaller, I don't want to say the word players, but people who are connected but aren't as much.
Right.
But I've at least got them on the phone. Most of them I've interviewed, firsthand. The day that Victoria Hutchinson walked into the courtroom, and I asked her, I said, "What are you doing here?" And she looked at Jesse, who was sitting there, and she said, I told lies that led to that man right there being in prison for over 15 years.
She did him very dirty. She, in my estimation, she owes, well, she's apologized to Jesse, but I feel like she owes Aaron a huge apology as well, because he was, she allowed him to be interviewed for hours and hours and hours. And I will say this for Detective Ridge, because he spent a lot of time with Aaron, and he was gentle in his interview process with Aaron. But when I listened back this last year, because I did several episodes, because you can't just do one on air on the Hutchinsons. Aaron, I can understand a little bit why Ridge was sort of leaning into believing him for a small, brief amount of time, because Aaron uses words that most kids that age don't use.
Mm-hmm.
The correct, which begs the question, but I think that is the question. He shouldn't have been listening and asking about Jesse, Damien, and Jason. He really should have been asking other questions. That's just my opinion from hearing, those interviews. So who's the person that you interviewed the most recently, I should say?
I interviewed Damien and Jason at the, I hate to say we had a conversation, but I did use it in a news story. But I had several conversations with them at the hearing where the judge denied the touch DNA testing to be done. I've interviewed Terry Hobbs several times in the last few months.
Oh, wow.
He apparently somehow or another, there's a convention every year called Crime Con.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are familiar with it. I'll be honest with you, even though I'm a true crime author and I've covered dozens and dozens of homicide cases, many of them around the country. I listened to one of your episodes the other day and you were talking about the Delphi murders. I actually had Kelsey German, which is Libby German's sister, on my podcast a few months ago.
Oh, wow.
And so I didn't even know what CrimeCon was. Well, my investigative partner and I, we were working on a case out of Melbourne, Arkansas with the case of Rebecca Gould. It's been pretty high profile, I guess. And that was the first murder case I ever covered. I was actually out there the day they found her body.
Oh, yes. I heard your interview with Ed Opperman, and I was fascinated by that case when you were talking about it. I know that's been some years back, but then it caused me to do some Googling. So yeah. Wow.
Yeah. And in that case, what we did is my partner and I, my investigative partner, we were able to lure her killer onto a Facebook page a year before he got arrested.
Wow.
And he was communicating with us. And so Oxygen Channel, they sponsor CrimeCon. They were interested in that story. So my partner and I went to Austin in 2021 and we presented on that case him communicating with us. And it just kind of blew up. And so at that point, I was familiar with CrimeCon. I got to know the CEO a little bit. Well,
Right.
then, I said, okay, that was a lot of fun. There were thousands of people there. It
Yeah.
was cool. And I never thought another thing of it. Well, then CrimeCon approached us about another case out of Lubbock, Texas, an unsolved case we were working on. And in the same time frame, the CEO at CrimeCon called me and said, hey, I need to talk to you about West Memphis 3. And I guess Terry Hobbs had agreed he wanted to do an interview for CrimeCon. And
What?
yeah, and they gave him some options as far as people who could interview him. And for whatever reason, he decided he wanted me to do it. And so I talked to him. I said, okay. I said, if you want to do this, I'll do it. And so we did an interview for CrimeCon, and it was played on stage in Las Vegas in late April of 2022. Jim Clemente was on stage with me, and along with Bob Ruff and Jim. Basically, what it was is I set up the interview, like the questions I asked, why I asked them, and then Jim would do an analysis of it.
I
And
see.
so that's kind of how that went down.
What I see, not all of us. Okay, CrimeCon came to Florida. I know I was wanting to go in like 2020, but that was whenever, we had the whole pandemic. And plus I looked at the prices and I was like, oh my gosh. So for those of us who were not able to attend CrimeCon, when you sat down with Terry Hobbs, what was your overall impression of him? Because it's real hard to get an impression of him when he's in like Paradise Lost, when even Purgatory, it's difficult. It's kind of then he's in a deposition, which that's not a good under good circumstances. So that's kind of hard to get a read. And then the rest of the stuff that the interviews he's done have been sort of like podcasts where you can't see him. So
Right.
I'm curious, what was your impression of Mr. Hobbs?
So I've seen Terry the last time I've seen him in real life was the day they got released. I was in the courtroom when the West Memphis 3 got released. In fact, I broke the story that this was happening.
Right.
I beat the New York Times by, I think, 2 hours is what I was told.
Wow.
So what happened was Terry was going to come to Vegas. We were going to do the interview on stage. Well, then he got cold feet because I guess people do threaten him a lot. And so he agreed to do the interview over Zoom.
Okay.
And so what we did is we recorded the interview and then we played it on this gigantic screen at the Paris Hotel in Vegas.
Okay.
And so we would play a clip and then I would talk about it and then Jim would analyze it. And somebody just asked if Terry wasn't happy about it. Yeah, I actually have talked to him about it. Because part of it was a little confusing to me because I couldn't understand why and I told him this. I said, I thought he agreed to do it like that. You know what I mean? The whole format.
Oh, right. With where you're asking the questions and then Jim Clemente comes and analyzes the answers. Yeah. Okay. All right.
And again, I mean, people don't understand. Like, I know who Jim Clemente is, but I don't know a lot of. Like, I know him. He was a nice guy to me when I met him, and
right.
And all that kind of stuff. But I didn't know like he had a position on this case or anything like that. So and I told Terry afterwards, I said, man, I could not believe that you would agree to that.
Right.
And so anyway, so that was, that's neither here nor there. It happened. I told him, we can't change it now.
Right.
So.
Yeah. You can't cry over spilled milk. Well, I suppose you could, but it doesn't do any good.
Right.
Wow. So was he amenable to all of the questions, or mainly what I want to know is, did you have to submit questions to him first for approval?
No, I never would have agreed to that.
I didn't know if you would agree to that or not, but I'm just curious because, and to some extent, I understand why Terry has been standoffish, right? With media. So what kind of questions did you ask him, and what were his, answers, and what were some of the questions that you were surprised by his answers, if any?
I don't know that I was surprised by any answers. I mean, I've interviewed serial killers, so
right.
There's no, I'm not surprised. This is what I do for a living.
A little hard to shake you, huh?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, yeah. I mean, it is at this point. I asked him straight up, did you kill those kids?
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, and he said no, he did not. And I asked him about the hair, that was found in the ligature. Which here's the thing, I'd actually asked him about that many years ago too,
Right.
and he said, the hair could be his, and that he, that it would be he it got if it's his, and then it got there via secondary hair transfer.
Right.
And I asked him about why did he wait to call the police until 9:30 that night, from
Right.
the restaurant, and he explained that, which I think everybody's familiar with, his explanations for that. And you know, I asked him, I said, what about this DNA evidence? Now, the first time I talked to him about it, he said he hoped a judge did come in and destroy it. But he said that, and I said, well, why would you want that? And he said, well, because he's tired of dealing with the West Memphis Three. And I could sympathize with that because I used to deal with John Mark Byers quite a bit, and he would just get crushed by supporters all the time.
Yeah.
And so when I told Terry that, I said, I mean, I get why if you were being portrayed in a light, if you didn't do this crime and you're being portrayed as you did in public, I mean, I can understand that. Well, then he modified his answer a few weeks later. We talked again, and he said, well, he goes, I want all the evidence. He goes, I don't want them testing just a little bit. I want them to test all of it.
Right.
And then the last time we talked about it, he'd kind of gone back to the mode of, I don't know if some supporters had been getting onto him or saying bad stuff about him online, but he told another podcaster and me, that he just said, I hope the judge just comes in and destroys it. He goes, I'm done dealing with this case. I can't take it anymore. And so, that was the gist of that.
What did he tell you about I have heard his explanation, but I don't know if everybody has heard. So what's his explanation for why he didn't call?
He has told people, or he's told me and told other people, that he did approach Dana Moore and John Mark Byers when they were reporting the other two boys missing that night. He approached them, and that he thought that he had told Dana that Stevie was missing. And, there's no way to, confirm or deny the story, obviously.
Right.
I mean, John Mark Byers has passed away, but I think John Mark Byers did sign a sworn affidavit, and John Mark Byers told me he didn't remember Terry coming up there, but it is possible in the stress of a moment, people forget, I mean, and there's no record of that happening. The first record of Stevie being, reported missing is at 9:30 that night, and again, I remind people, and I'm, people can read into that whatever they want. I don't read into things. I just report them.
Right.
In 1993, is it that uncommon for a kid to be out past, 9:30 in their neighborhood riding their bike? I mean,
I think if they'd have been a couple of years older, maybe not, but this is where it's sticky for me in that sense, because Christopher had somewhere to be. That's the thing. He
right.
knew that he had to go out. His parents were planning to go to dinner. That's one of the things that John Mark Byers had told Chris when he put him underneath the carport to clean that afternoon. And
Yes.
so I think that if they'd have been like 10 or 11, I think 9:30. Okay. Once it starts getting dark, though, because I know I grew up, but when I was in 1993, I was 16 years old. So the street light rule had long since gone. But when I was younger, it was by the street lights. And so I feel like, I think it was a little bit, but this is the thing about Terry that's never quite sat right with me, is that, let's say he's telling the God's honest truth, the gospel truth here. And
Mm-hmm.
why would he tell Dana Moore? She can't help him. Why not tell the cops? He was at David Jacoby's house. And I know that Pam and Terry didn't have a home phone. So why not? I mean, there's Flash Market has a payphone. Why not use a payphone at some, you know what I'm saying? At some point prior to, because Stevie at that point, they went to look for him at what, 4:30, 4:45, when Pam was supposed to be at work, and he didn't get back to Catfish Island, which isn't all that far from the neighborhood or whatever. But that's 4 hours of not being able to find your kid.
Yeah.
you
I
know?
mean, again, you make a good point. Like I said, I can't speak to that circumstance. I can
Can't
only
make
tell
the
you
news, you just report it.
I can't make. Yeah, I can't. I don't make it up. I just report it.
I
He said
gotcha.
he says he told Dana and John Mark Byers. I don't know if Dana's ever publicly spoken about it. I know that when she testified at trial, she never mentioned it.
No, but
So
she also, to be fair, that's the other, she wasn't asked either.
that's true.
She wasn't asked. So maybe if she had been asked, she would have reported it. Does he, uh, does he talk about Pam and the way that she has gone back and forth from saying he did it or it's possible he did it? You know, she's wavered back and forth between sort of she's I've never heard Pam actually outright accuse him. Her sister, on the other hand, is a little bit different, but Pam has never. Has he ever talked about that?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it in the past, especially, and he would tell me that she was just under the influence of like the wrong people. They were telling her, things and getting in her head and all this other stuff. And I mean, I don't think that Pam or Terry would disagree that they've always had a very volatile relationship for a
Right.
long time, and probably not helped by the fact that Stevie was murdered. I mean, I've seen it. I've covered a lot of murder cases, and the number of families that are just ripped to shreds by an event like this, just
Yeah.
a normal operating family, how that it just destroys them.
Yeah.
So
Statistically speaking, even the best marriages don't survive a murdered child. They just don't.
yeah,
Look at Adam Walsh's parents. It didn't. Their marriage didn't survive, and they had a good marriage,
yeah. Well,
strong marriage.
I think Todd and Dana Moore got divorced too. I
Yes,
mean,
nobody is still. Well, I mean, I think I always wonder about Mark and Melissa if their marriage would have survived if Melissa had survived. You know, because
yeah,
they seemed really in love with each other.
it may have. I mean,
I always wonder about that. The what ifs, you know.
absolutely.
So what was Jim? What did Jim Clemente say about Terry Hobbs? What was his impression of the answers that Terry was giving you during your interview with him?
The thing about it is like people think that we had this like polished presentation that we were, that we had rehearsed it and all this other stuff. And the fact of the matter is, I met Jim Clemente probably 2 to 3 hours before we went on stage.
Wow.
But I'm used to speaking in public, so it's not. I wasn't afraid of anything. I didn't know what he was going to say necessarily because he was going to analyze it off the cuff. He was. I knowing what I know now, he was obviously suspicious of some of his answers.
Right.
One thing he keyed in on was the fact that he waited till 9:30 to call, or
Right.
whatever, 9:15, whatever the actual time was. That was suspicious to him. I do remember that. And then there was some of the phrasing that Terry used, like he said "as a parent" a lot, or something like that. And I may be wrong about that exactly. And so Jim keyed in on that, which Jim's an expert on like language analysis and behavior analysis.
Right. Right.
And I'm not. That's again not my expertise.
Right.
I just ask the questions
But you
and
were
that sort
there,
of.
and you're the only person that I can talk to that was there that can tell me what Jim Clemente said. And
That's true too.
I'm curious about what I mean. I will say that as a parent, before I went live with you tonight, I watched Paradise Lost 1 and Paradise Lost 3. I skip over 2, but
Yeah.
but I've seen it 11 billion times. So but I just wanted, there was some things that I had forgotten about, how it is. Anyway,
Hmm.
and he does say as a parent, that is a phrase that he uses quite frequently, as a parent, as a parent. He does use
Yes.
that phrase when he talks about 1993, when he talks about the events of 93, and then even when he talks about current events like 2008, 2009, 2000, when he learned about the hair and all that, that is a phrase he uses quite frequently. And I'm curious what it was about that phrase that Jim Clemente keyed in on and found interesting.
I think he was saying that it was like he was like removing himself like, instead of saying like as a father or stepfather,
Ah,
it was more of a generic term. So I don't know.
that's
And
interesting.
and here's the thing, and this is in all honesty, like when you're on stage doing something like that, the only thing on your mind is about what you're about to have to say in a few
Right,
minutes.
right,
You're
right,
not
right.
you're not thinking about what the other people might be saying as much. And I probably could go back and watch it and learn a little bit more about it. But he did key in on that.
Wow.
And he also he was curious about like I asked a few questions about like I think the term you guys use on here is the SA nature or some of the
Yes.
aspects of that with the
Mhm.
boys.
Mhm.
And I think that maybe I don't even remember exactly what Terry said, but he didn't say much about it, and so Jim keyed in on that a little bit. But
Right.
like I said, it wasn't like an orchestrated thing, so I
No,
didn't.
no.
I mean,
That's
it wasn't.
interesting. That's fascinating that he keyed in on that because back um in the early, 2000s, whenever I started looking into this case, people were very critical of John Mark Byers for the
Hmm.
exact opposite. They felt that he was too um like he referred to the Christopher as my baby, which is
Yeah.
that's a Southern thing.
Yes.
Um, but a lot of people didn't understand it, but I remember people being very, very critical of the way that John Mark Byers was almost the really, if you look at it, really break it down, he was the complete antithesis to Terry Hobbs in every aspect. He was the one that was demanding help. He knew something was wrong almost immediately, which he took criticism for.
Yes.
Um, I remember the criticism he took for the slip during the uh, polygraph test, where he refers to Melissa as when my wife was murdered, which he does think at that time he thought of her dying from a broken heart from the loss of Christopher, and so he said that it was because the West Memphis Three had killed Christopher that they, in essence, murdered Melissa. But I remember he took a lot of scrutiny and heavy criticism for that. So in every way he was the one parent that was really interviewed in a very meaningful way by the police, where Terry was, if he was, there is no record of it.
Yeah. There's no record of it, and I don't believe that he probably was, to be honest with you, because they have records of virtually every other person,
Hmm.
and there's none. I mean, it's absolutely true. It's not just that Callahan missed it on their website 'cause that's where most people go. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. Well, and Terry's really, of the parents, not the only one. Melissa's doesn't exist. There are notes. Um, but as far as like Melissa, Dana, I understand why they wouldn't interview Todd in like super in depth because he was out of town. So that
Yeah.
makes sense. But anyway, there was something else Bloom Tick Bloom has asked me a bunch about the Hollingsworth and their
Hmm.
and them recanting. You want to talk a little bit about that? What you know, what you witnessed, and who all recanted and what they said.
Sure. So I think we all know the story. Narlene Hollingsworth. The whole clan was out in the car. Her
Right.
husband, her children, all those people, and they were driving.
87 people in a Ford Escort, right?
Yeah, there
Mhm.
was a bunch of them in there, and I mean, I can tell you right now, I have a lot of experience in the courtroom. I've heard a lot of testimony. I've read, maybe I was going to say thousands or hundreds of thousands of documents. I actually think it might be in the millions by now.
Wow.
And just reading her original statement, it didn't pass the smell test at all for me.
No. No. No, no, no.
And I'm sorry. She said in her original statement that she saw, as they drove by, she saw Damien, she saw Domini, and she was asked, "Are you sure it was Domini?" And she said, "I would know." And I guess she called her niece, even though she wasn't actually her niece.
Right.
She goes, "I would know that girl anywhere because she sat on my hip when
Right.
she was like a kid, like a little kid."
Right.
And so automatically right there, you have a problem. because if she's telling the truth,
Right.
that's not Jason Baldwin, that's Dominique Tier there
Right.
with Damien. And so, and then the other problem is if she misidentified someone that she's known since she was 6 years old,
Right.
and it was Jason, then how can you trust that she actually identified Damien Eccles?
Correct.
So that's a problem. I mean, it's a real problem. And then there's a couple of other things. If you look at it, she claimed that she knew that the three other boys had already disappeared.
Right.
Okay, well, that's not true because
Nobody
Stevie
knew.
was being reported missing at the very moment she claims to have driven by and saw these two people.
Right. Right.
So she could not have known that those three boys were missing. So that, again, is a problem.
Right.
And then her husband, who's sitting next to her in the front seat of the car, who's now her ex-husband,
Right.
he says he couldn't identify who those people were.
Yeah.
And so he's actually sitting the closest to the two people that they claim to have seen.
Right. He would be in the best position to see.
Yes, and he said he didn't see him. And then you've got her two children who kind of told the two older children who kind of told the same story.
Right.
That they noticed that she was wearing this particular, and the funny thing is that they give us one specific detail about the two people they saw.
Right.
And they say that there was a flower on the jeans that she wore.
Right.
That Dominique was wearing.
Correct.
So, and then, of course, and this is just me, from an analytical standpoint, she claims that earlier, just a couple hours before this, she drove by Weaver School and saw these three boys.
4.
No, she said 3. Okay. And she said one of them was heavier set and wearing a green pair of shorts and all this other stuff, which was not, none of those 3 boys were.
No.
And so I asked a friend of mine who works for American Military University. She's a criminologist, or not criminologist. She teaches criminology and forensics, and she also was a counterintelligence officer in the U.S. military. And I said, okay, so what are the chances that an average person living in that area would just be driving around and run into 3 boys that she doesn't know?
Right.
And an hour and a half later, they're being murdered. And then a short time after that, she's going to be driving down another road in another part of that neighborhood that she doesn't even live in.
Right.
And she's going to come across one of the suspects, at least, she claims, and then possibly the other suspect if you believe that she was misidentified.
Right.
And then there was a third element to this. So she wrote, she knew Jesse Miskelly Jr., and she knew his family.
Yes.
And originally her statement to police was that on the night of the murders around 6:30, she went to the Highland Trailer Park and she saw Jesse and she talked to him. And then after he got arrested, she actually wrote a letter and gave it to Jesse Sr. and said, hey, I saw him at the Highland Trailer Park at 6:30 that night, which would blow a gigantic hole in the prosecution's case.
Yes, it would have been. Yeah, she's problematic on many levels for many reasons.
Yeah. And then by the time she gets to testify in court, she has changed that story to say she saw him on the Thursday. Well, I asked my friend who's an analyst in all this, and she's one of the best in the world. I mean, I said, what is the probability that all of this could have happened the way she said it happened? And my friend said 0. That's the probability. It didn't happen that way. She said, this is an impossible, ridiculous story.
Right. Right.
And for her kids, there was no variance in what they said compared to what she said, which here's the thing about people. And this is just a general rule.
Right.
If 3 people see a car wreck, you're going to see 3 versions. They may all see the exact same car wreck, see all the elements the same, but there's going to be some variance in the way they tell the story.
Right.
There was no variance at all between those 3. And it's because they were at home and they told the story.
Correct.
And so they all knew the story. They got on the stand. They told it. They changed the dates, and the things that she said they were fatally flawed.
Right. Right. Speaking of astronomical, and I'm going to ask you this because because you have covered so much true crime and you have been in the courtroom. What are the odds of a crime scene with water, right? And the bodies being placed in the water and the clothing being placed in the water, and yet only secondary and tertiary fiber and hair transfer occurring, that the water washed away all direct fiber transfer, hair transfer, any of that. What do you make of that? What do you think the odds are for that?
0.
It's
Water can't pick and choose what bits of evidence it's going to wash away, so it's 0.
Thank you. I just
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, those odds are astronomical for it
yeah.
for it only to have left those elements. What else was I going to ask you? There was something else, and now I can't remember. What about this case has? What was it? I mean, I think this case has several, but and it's different for everybody. But what was a jaw-dropping bit of evidence that just made you just kind of shock you because you had a perception of the evidence being a certain piece of evidence being one way, but then being in the courtroom and hearing it was something different. Did you have that experience?
Yeah, there were a couple actually. The first time I saw the lake knife, I couldn't believe it.
Okay.
I'm not a surgeon. I'm not a doctor. I had a son, who was that age. Obviously, I'm a grown man, so I was an 8-year-old boy at one time.
Right.
And when I saw that knife sitting on the prosecutor's table one day, and I had a Rambo style knife like that.
Right.
But I hadn't had it in a long time, and I was looking at it, and it's dull and it's really big. And the first thought that went through my head was, if you have that kind of a knife, why are there no, why weren't there any bone piercing injuries to the victims?
Right.
Like, you have this knife.
Right.
And also, and again, I know we have to watch what we say on YouTube.
Yeah.
But why wasn't it just cut off?
Right.
Why
I think people don't understand that injury. It's not well documented in the autopsy report.
And it's not well explained either.
No,
it's not, because it's
not.
I'm trying to figure out a way to say it without saying it.
It's not a castration in a clinical sense at all. No. The best way that I can describe that injury is, and this will probably ruin, I hope nobody's eating. If you're eating, just turn your earbuds down or whatever, walk away. It looks like ground meat.
Yes. And
it doesn't. It's not the way that, because like I said, I rewatched Paradise Lost 1 today, and I watched Dr. Peretti's testimony, which that his testimony at both trials is problematic, especially in the fact that he gives 2 different times of death. That's problematic. One that actually would kind of ironically exonerate Jason and Damon, because he puts the time of death much later at their trial than he does at Jesse's trial. But it's and Paul Ford, Jason's attorney, original trial attorney, the way that he is asking Dr. Peretti the question would lead the person watching the documentary, or even just watching the trial live in the courtroom, because obviously the jury sees the pictures. It's not that they weren't put up, they were passed around. So I don't understand how Ford looked at those pictures and thought that those were the right questions to ask. Because it wasn't done under any type. It's not a surgical, clinical, anything at all.
No, and even Peretti on the stand, he said that a surgeon trained with a sharpened scalpel in an operating room, it would take that person probably 10, 15, 20 minutes, maybe even longer,
right,
to do what the prosecution was claiming was done. And that's under the pristine circumstances with a professionally trained person.
Right.
3 teenage kids, who have a 10th grade education is the highest level any of them achieved at that point, between all 3 of them, in a muddy ditch bank at dusk when there's mosquitoes everywhere, and there's water and there's a bank. I mean,
right.
it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, I can say that. I mean,
Right. I don't
somebody
think it
said,
makes
"Oh, there's
sense
a
to a
question."
lot of people.
I'd love to know how George's interactions with Jesse, as a lot of non still believe he's not that slow. I can tell you right now, Jesse. I can tell you this: I interview people for a living. That's what I do. I could interviewing him. I've talked to him a bunch. Um, he couldn't be a competent expert on anything. I mean, he is. The first time I met him, he was standing next to me, and I'm not a super tall guy, but he's definitely shorter than me. And he had
Yeah,
this
he's only
clock
like
tat.
5'6" or 5'7". She's not a
He's
tall
shorter
guy.
than that. He's shorter than that.
You
I
think
mean,
so? You think he's shorter than that? You
oh
think
yeah,
5'5" maybe?
I think he's at least five. I've never actually measured him, but yeah, he's
Okay. Yeah,
short,
I knew
and
he was short.
yeah. And so he had a clock tattooed to the top of his head, and he was standing next to me. And I said, "So what does that clock mean?" And he just looked at me and said, "Doing time." And then he looked straight forward. And then he never really explained it. After about 3 times of asking him, he finally said that he was going to put and I think this came out in the documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, this is the thing. This is the thing about Jesse.
5'2". He's 5'2".
Yeah,
Daphne
he's
Blake's got it,
short.
5'2".
Yeah, he's
Wow,
short.
he's shorter than I am.
Yeah, he's short. So this is the thing about Jesse, and I tell this story. So I know Scott Ellington pretty well. Okay. I've known Scott. I was actually there the morning that he got sworn in as a prosecutor. I just happened to be at the courthouse and actually took a picture of him and his wife, and I think one of his children when he got sworn in. I just happened to be there that morning.
Right.
And I ended up taking a picture and doing a little story about it. And so I've known Scott a long time, and I get along with Scott very well. He's a judge now. And Scott was still the prosecutor. You know, they let him out. You know, if they jaywalked, they could go back to prison for so many years, according to their agreement.
Right.
Well, a lot of people, this story didn't get much traction, but I got a call on a Monday morning, and they said, "Hey, they just let Jesse Miskelly Jr. out of the Crittenden Detention Center. He got popped over the weekend. He'd been in jail all weekend." And I said, "For what?" And he said he got arrested because he was driving a car with no tags, no driver's license, no insurance, no headlights, and he was driving at night.
Oh, wow.
So I called Scott. And I said, "Scott, are you going to put him in? Are you going to put him back in state prison for, this violation?" And of course, he said, "Hell no, I'm not going to do that." And
but he could have.
He could have. And here's the thing:
he could have for the DUI too.
Yeah, and that's not the first time Jesse had been caught driving a car at dark with no headlights.
Oh, Jesse, bless it.
I mean, you don't have to take my word for that.
No, I believe you. No, he's got a record.
Or anybody who's listening, go look. He has been stopped multiple times. He knows he can go back to prison for literally any violation of the law, and he's driving a car at night with no headlights, no license, and no license plate, and no insurance.
Right.
What does that tell you about his mental acuity?
Well, I think what they're trying, it's not, this is what I argue frequently but you've interviewed him in person. And what I've noticed is that when Jesse's being interviewed, other than during the confession, he is able to speak and tell a story from start to finish.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to pull every single detail out of him in the way that was done in that confession. And so was that your experience when you interviewed him? He was able to give you, get his thoughts out without you having to constantly interrupt to ask for more details. Do you know what I mean? The way that the police interview was, or the interrogation. I don't know. They like to use the word interview, but it was an interrogation. Yeah,
it's an interrogation. I think that's a pretty accurate way of saying it. He is able to tell a story lucidly. The one problem, I used to cling to his confession. There was a time when I really thought these guys did it.
Right.
And I would cling to that confession because I just couldn't imagine somebody confessing to a crime they didn't commit. Well, like I said, I've been doing this a long time, and I've come across many cases I've personally dealt with. In fact, there was a case in this same judicial district 2 years after the West Memphis Three were released from prison, where a 17-year-old named Christopher Sowell confessed, and this is about 45 minutes from West Memphis.
Okay.
He confessed to the murder of an 11-year-old girl who disappeared the night before. And he confessed. The parts of the confession got out. The confession was very accurate to a degree.
Right.
Scott Ellington was the prosecutor in that case. And I called Scott and I said, Scott, there's only one problem I'm having with this. And the problem is the girl was found 11 miles. She lived out in the rural area called, around a town called Gosnell. And she was out in a place called Half Moon. It's like a bunch of gravel roads and people are, out on ATVs all the time. And she was actually riding her bike with her little puppy Rybok out on a gravel road. And so she vanishes. Her dad's cooking dinner. He looks out there once he sees her. The next time he doesn't see her. Well, within about a half an hour, he's out looking for her. Christopher Sowell was their neighbor who rode the school bus with her.
Okay.
And so Christopher was out with her dad looking for her within a half an hour. Christopher didn't have a driver's license. And so my question to Scott was, I said, Scott, here's the thing. The confession looks pretty good. I said, but here's the problem. How did he get her body 11 miles away into a drainage ditch? Which, by the way, I will say this, that puppy that was with her.
Right.
Searchers found the puppy the next morning on a gravel road walking, and they took the puppy back to where they found the puppy, and the puppy led them straight to her body. Yeah.
Wow.
So my question to Scott was, I was like, okay, so how in the world could he have pulled this off and be out looking with her? And Scott said, we're gonna fix this at trial.
Right.
Well, that 17-year-old who had the same, he is in the same like mental IQ range as Jesse Misskelley Jr. They're exactly the same age, same IQ.
Oh wow.
And he sat in jail for 8 months. Well, then all of a sudden one day I get a call and his bond had been dropped from like $2 million to $20,000. And I was like, what? And apparently what had happened is they found a single sperm cell on this young girl's body.
Oh, wow.
And they DNA tested the sperm cell and it did not belong to Christopher Sowell. It belonged to another neighbor who had come home early from work, a guy named Freddie Sharp III.
Wow.
And so they had to admit that he had falsely confessed and got some details right. But the thing of it is, you got to be careful about when somebody gets some details right, because I can say, hey, they found a body in a body of water, let's say.
Right.
How do you think they died? Well, 75% of people are going to say drowning. Aha, you knew how they died because they drowned. Well,
yeah.
Or let's say they found this person that had been murdered and they found a rope around their neck. Okay, well, most people are going to say somebody strangled them. You know, so it's not like he got some. When I went back and looked at that confession later, I was like, this really wasn't as. Confessions should have specific information that clarifies what happened at a crime scene.
Right. Exactly. And that element is missing completely out of Jesse's confession.
Yeah, and there's a huge problem in Jesse's confession.
Huge.
There's a very huge problem, and I know people say he confessed 4 and 5 and 6 times. Well, here's the thing about telling a lie. If you tell a lie 5 or 6 times, it still doesn't make it true.
That's the very argument that I make about Jesse's confessions. Jesse can confess 1 time, 100 times, or 1 million times. If he gets it, if it's wrong, it's wrong. Whether it's wrong 1 time, 100 times, or 1,000,000 times, wrong is still wrong. And the thing for me that's missing, that I never understand, that this is as proof of anything, right? So they say that the reason that this is a detail that Jesse explains and gets correct, that Michael Moore ran away. And because Michael Moore was found a little bit of a distance from where Christopher and Stevie were found, that makes Jesse's confession accurate, except for the fact that you have to, before Jesse said that and after Jesse said that, he also said that he chased him down and brought him back.
Right.
So
it's ludicrous.
So if he brought him back, then why is Michael Moore's body being placed distanced from Stevie and Chris's bodies? Why is that evidence of Jesse chasing him down? Or Michael Moore almost? It's not, because
okay. Let's change the scenario. Let's say Jesse told them that the 3 boys were buried. like say they dug 3 holes and they said, okay, Michael was buried away from the other 2. And so then if you go to, and then you find the bodies and you say, okay, well, he knew that, that Michael had been buried 20 feet away. That's one thing.
Right.
But to say that he chased Michael down, brought him back, and then left, because he also claims that the boys were, the SA thing.
Right.
And so that makes no sense at all. Okay.
None.
And that is a non-argument to me, because, and also they're put into some water, which it was kind of still water, but it's still a creek. So things are going to move around. I mean, there's no question about that. And so, and water's a weird thing. I've seen a lot of bodies in water. I've been involved in stuff like that before. So you can never trust it.
Right.
The thing about Jesse's confessions I do have a problem with one element of the confession.
Okay.
So he confessed, 5, 6, 7, who knows how many times.
Right.
Well, first I asked Dan Stidham. I went to Dan Stidham's office one day.
Before you, let me greet Davi Das real quick. Hi, Davi Das. I'm sorry that I didn't greet everybody. I was late and I just wanted to get started. Okay. My apologies. Please continue.
So I went to Dan one day. He's a judge up in Greene County.
Yes.
And he's a pretty, he's a good judge,
Yeah. And an ardent supporter of Jesse, and has been since
day
forever.
One. He got on the stand in the Rule 37 hearings and said, I was horrible. I mean, I've never seen an attorney do it. I was there. I was like,
he did. And he said, I wasn't, and by all rights, I shouldn't have even been picked to do this. I'm not qualified under Arkansas statutes to even represent Jesse, or anybody for that matter, in a capital crime. But okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so what he told me, so I talked to him after he testified for a while. I sat in his truck with him and we chatted for a bit. And then I saw him a couple of years later at some event I was at. He just happened to be at the same event. So him and I stopped and talked for a while. But I went by his office one day because I was like, because this, there seems to be some gravity to the argument that he confessed multiple times. And his story seemed to get better each time he told it.
Right.
And so I asked Dan, I said, hey, can you talk for a minute? He said, sure. And I said, so explain to me why Jesse would confess all these times and how the confession seems to get better each time he does it. And he laughed at me and he said, listen, he goes, you know what Jesse thought I was when I first started dealing with him? He thought I was a cop.
Bless it.
Yeah. And so he didn't know, like half the time he didn't know that I was actually there as an advocate for him, that I was his legal advocate. And so he had no conception of all that. And he said, here's the thing. He sat through his trial. And so he learned things that he didn't know about the case. Right. And so that's why he was able to give a much better version when he did later confessions than he did originally, because he said he learned over time.
But barely learned, because even in those later confessions, particularly the ones that the nuns hold on to so ardently, which is the Bible confession, as if that means any. I will never. I think that what people forget is that, first of all, Dan, he did testify that initially he thought that he was really going to be preparing Jesse to testify against Damien and Jason, that he was going to get a plea deal. That's what he was preparing his client for. And even then, as many times as Jesse was going over the story with him repeatedly, he was still getting things incorrect. And even the Bible confession, he still gets a lot of things that he should know by this point correct, but he gets them incorrect. And he still doesn't ever. This is what has never made sense to me. The way that Jesse has this crime going down is that it just happened. Nobody is saying anything to anybody. The boys aren't saying anything to them or to each other. Damien, Jason, and Jesse are not speaking to each other. There's no conversation between anybody at all. Right. It's just, it's very it reads, and when you listen to the audio, when the audio is available, like somebody who wasn't there. So it's almost like you did a better job repeating to me what Jim Clemente said on a stage, even though you were not really listening to what he was saying, because you were busy thinking about the thing that you were going to say. You were focused on what you were supposed to be doing. And you did a much better job of relaying a conversation than Jesse did. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just there's those details are missing, and I
You know
think that
what it is? I can give you a good example. It's like you're telling us that Jesse's like this really good artist and he's going to paint this picture of
right,
exactly what happened, and then he brings the picture in and it's a stick figure,
right, with a
and
big
you're
orange sun.
yeah, and you're just like no, and the thing about it is that there is one thing that he said in all of his many confessions that is factually and absolutely not true. And you
Correct.
don't have to take my word for it. You can take all the defense forensic experts' word for it, and you can take Dr. Frank Peretti and Dr. William Sterner, who is his boss, and I was there when
Correct.
I was there when both of them testified to this. Those boys did not
Eh,
have any SA at
correct.
all. It didn't
Correct.
happen. There was
Correct.
none of the there's three symptoms of SA.
Right.
One involves, we'll say,
There would be there would be
tears
tearing,
and
there would be
bruising, stuff like
there's
that.
evidence. There would be physical
Yeah.
evidence left that is on the to the body. There would be the yeah,
Yes, and
it would be it would be clear.
it's virtually it is impossible. I mean, Dr. Peretti said it on the stand in the Rule 37 hearings. I was in the room. I wrote the story for the Associated Press. He said there was absolutely none of that present. And there's also, I guess, we have to be careful about how we say this. The elements that make a baby, there's none of that. And I see that a lot where people say that there was some found,
Mm-hmm.
and that's absolutely not true.
No,
There was
it's not
none
true.
recovered.
No,
And
it's
here's
not
the
true.
thing. I think I want to caution people who like get on Callahan and just they read all these reports and they say, oh, well, this person, filed a police report and said that that this thing happened. Just because somebody files a police report doesn't mean it's true. I'm sitting in my house right now. I've got a doctor that lives next door to me. If let's say his house got robbed tonight,
Right.
and they come over and knock on my door and they say, the police do the next day, hey, George, did you see anything last night at around 9 o'clock? And I'd be like, well, no, these aliens landed in my backyard and they were trying to steal my dogs. And so I was out there dealing with these aliens, but then they finally left.
Right, exactly.
Do you think they would put me on the stand and say, hey, George was dealing with these aliens, but he thought he might have heard something in the middle of all that. And I can't tell you how many police reports I've read in my life where somebody would report something that was just a lie, just some crazy story. And when I read through a lot of those reports on Callahan, I focus in on the things that were presented in court.
That's what I did.
So when it comes to Dr. Peretti, though, it's very interesting. So in the original trials, he said that there were no signs of SA at all.
Right.
But toward the end of it, he couched his testimony saying, but it was still possible. And then he also came up with a story where Michael had, bruising
on the ears.
To his ears.
Yeah.
Well, here was the problem. The person that he cited as an expert in that realm, a person he said that had given a lecture and explained how that is, a forced act. We'll say
Correct.
it like that.
Correct. Very good. You're learning. I'm yes.
Yes. That person has never, ever, they've never been able to find any record where that person is an expert in sexual assault cases at all.
Right. Right. I mean, so then you have, the thing is, there are a lot of reports, and there are a lot of reports on things that Damien did. Let's talk about Herbert Bartouche. Okay. Herbert swears up and down about this dog story. Now, the thing that people don't consider is that a Great Dane, even in 1993, was an expensive dog to have. Okay.
Right.
And a Great Dane going missing, even if it was an old Great Dane, would have not gone unnoticed. That's number one. But number two, the other thing that that people should really look at on Callahan's are the police logs. Between Highland Trailer Park and Lakeshore, Those were the most law callingest trailer parks I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen a lot. Okay. But they were forever calling the police out there. The police were out at Highland, which is where Jesse lived, 3 times May 5th. They were out the day before as well for a similar situation, a neighbor smacking a kid, and twice. So you don't think that if that occurred, that somebody would have reported that way before May 5th? Of course they would have.
Hey, listen, I've got dogs. If anything happened to my dogs, come on. And anybody who's a dog person knows exactly what I'm talking about. That story, I wouldn't believe it. I'd have to have, again, show me the proof that this happened. Don't just say that it happened, show me the proof. And the thing about it, somebody asked about the videotape.
Joe, Daphne, sorry, my bad. Yes, Joe. I don't know why I said her.
Joe, yeah.
Joe Bartush.
Somebody had asked about the video or audio tape of Jesse confessing to robbing a convenience store.
Yes.
And that absolutely is true. And I was in court. I can't remember if it was a videotape they played or it was just an audio tape, but it was definitely true because I wrote a story about it where he did confess to robbing a convenience store that he never robbed. Now, the thing about going back to Peretti, so the thing of it is, during the Rule 37, he was vehement that he said there was no SA that happened. Right. And so he said there was no evidence of it. And the defense attorney said, yeah, but you said that it could happen. And he goes, could it happen? And he goes, well, anything's possible. And the defense attorney goes, yeah, anything in the world is possible. Right. But you're saying now that there would be some sign or symptom of this happening, and there is none. Right. There's nothing. And so, and also he asked him about, the other thing about the bruising to the ears. Here's the problem. Only one ear was bruised.
Right.
And there is not one single scientific journal in the world that exists that says that there was bruising caused by, somebody grabbing someone by the ears to commit that particular act.
Right.
And here was the problem. So there was bruises inside Michael's mouth and there were bruises inside Christopher's mouth. When he explained the bruises inside Christopher's mouth, he said that he was probably having a seizure from being attacked. And that's what was causing the bruising. When he explained the bruising in Michael's mouth, he said it was caused by this other thing.
Right, exactly,
and it's the same injury.
Exactly. They don't, and this is the other thing nobody ever really touched on in the trial that I can find, okay? The original trial is the trauma to the boys' heads. I'm talking about the skull fractures.
Yes.
It was, I can't, I don't know how to impress upon people enough other than for them to go read it. And then if you have to, like I did when I very first started researching, look up the medical terminology. It will explain it to you. And then you will get a picture of yes, did they drown? Yes. But I have always believed, this is just my personal thought, is that it was a last gasp. And that really the trauma to their heads.
Yeah.
Really,
especially like with like Michael Moore.
Yes.
He was hit in the head one time. It was not a fatal blow, but it was one that would have knocked him unconscious.
Right.
And he had one contusion to the head, and then he was tied up and drowned in the creek. Right. That's what happened to him. And there was no SA. There was none of that stuff.
No.
And so another thing I'd like to say about Peretti, when he was on the stand, and I was there for all 2 days of his testimony, another thing that he said, Paul Ford said that he had a conversation with Peretti, who raises terrapins, who raises turtles. I told him in the summer of 1993 that he thought that some of the injuries were turtle bites. And Paul Ford, under oath, sat on the stand, I was there, and told this story. And I thought, wow, that's weird. Well, then when Peretti gets on the stand, he says that's absolutely a lie. I never said that. Here's the problem. He also said that that Peretti, he can get on the stand and lie about that, and it would be perjury for him, right? Because he said it and then he didn't. Well, he also when Paul gets on the stand and testifies to that fact, he can be disbarred if it's proved that he lied about that. And here's what's
Correct.
funny. So Peretti says all this. Well, then the defense moves along. And so they say, so did you ever tell the defense attorneys that there was absolutely no essay, there was no way, and no prosecutor could credibly make the argument that any essay happened to these three boys? And Peretti said, well, I don't recall. Well, guess what happened? Robin
Did they?
Wadley, who was one
Yeah, I
of the
was going
defense
to say,
attorneys,
did they bust out that transcribed phone call between the two of them? Because I hope
they
they
did.
did.
They did. And they said, would you believe that he might have recorded? And even Judge Burnett at this point, because people were asking, like, oh my God, is this legal? And Peretti was like, is that legal? Because he was real defensive. And in the summer of 1993, Peretti said that no prosecutor
Yes, he
could
did.
make the argument. And he said it definitively. There was no ifs, ands, or buts. And he told that attorney, and here's the thing, if the attorney hadn't recorded the conversation, Peretti would have claimed, like he did with Paul Ford,
It didn't happen.
it didn't happen, or I
Or
can't
I don't
remember,
remember.
or
Yeah.
this other stuff. And here's the thing that's interesting about it. So if you look at the case from the summer of 93 to when the trials happened in 94, is it possible that he could have changed his mind in some way or for some reason? It is. But there's no intervening fact that came to light that would
Right.
have done that.
Right.
And so
yeah.
I guess the bottom line with that is that Jesse said that the boys were the victims of SA, and every confession, and everyone agrees that did not happen.
Well, not everybody. There are still people who will argue vehemently that it did happen, that they were essayed, and I cannot for the life of me.
Anybody who was under oath in a courtroom, they agree with that.
Correct. Like that's one argument. That argument has been made so many times over the years, and I will never understand why people even want that to have happened. Isn't it better to know now definitively that it didn't? It's bad enough that the boys were murdered, right? They're 8. The world was robbed of their potential. Whatever Chris Byers, Michael Moore, and Stevie Branch were going to be, the world was robbed of their potential. Their families were robbed of their potential, but to hang on to say that happened when it didn't. And there is and all of the evidence is to the contrary. I've never understood why anybody would want to hold on to that argument. It's sort of like, why make it worse?
Yes, and I do remember Jim Clemente saying this, and we talked, and him and I had a conversation about this. The fact that there's no physical evidence of SA, there's none of what you would expect if a male were to do that to another male, as far as
right,
whatever. And all the other elements we've talked about. That doesn't mean that SA wasn't involved in some degree, like a fantasy or something like that.
Correct.
Because there are different levels to SA. And Jim did talk about that a little bit during presentation. I actually had a long conversation with him afterwards about that, because I was interested in his thoughts on that, because I do work on a lot of different murder cases. I write about them. And so there is a possible element of that. But the problem is, that's not what Jesse said.
Correct.
He said that this happened, and he said it happened every single time, and it did not.
Right. And there is an element. There is, I have to spell it for YouTube, a sexual element to this crime with them. The way that they were tied is, of course, even though they give you a warning for Paradise Lost 1, it's still right there, right? And nobody's out, even as many times as I've seen it, I'm still, every single time, every single time.
You want to hear a funny story about that?
Yeah, tell me.
So Joe and Bruce were at odds over how they were going to begin the doc. Like they weren't, and I hope I get this right. I think it was Joe that didn't want to open the doc with the 3 boys' bodies like that, the crime scene. And Bruce fought him on it. Of course, Bruce has passed away from diabetes since then. But Bruce told me the story. He's like, He goes, I fought for it. He goes, I thought that the shock value, that this would just drive everybody home. If you see that at the beginning of the documentary, you're watching it to the very end. And I said,
Yes,
you are right.
you are right. I will say the first time I saw the documentary, I was, I don't know, 19, I think. And I didn't come in at the very beginning. I actually came in at the part where Joe Hutchinson is talking about their whole family being partial to black and Johnny Cash wearing black. That's where I came in, and I watched from that point on. And
Hey, I did a cool story with Johnny Cash's sister a few years ago.
oh, did you?
She took me on a tour of their childhood home in Diaz, which
Oh, wow.
ironically is where
Yeah.
that wrestling match happened or
Right,
didn't
right,
happen.
right. But yeah, so what I thought it was, honestly, I didn't think it was an actual documentary. I thought it was sort of like Kids, because that movie had come out at around the same time, and that's what I
Mm-hmm.
thought it was. And then years later, I watched it from the beginning, and but that's my little West Memphis 3 how I found it story. But anyway, I watched it again today because I was talking about Damien yesterday and what did he know and when did he know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that they were tied is very interesting. It isn't for keeping somebody immobile. Um, could they have? I mean, it's not like they could go far, but they could still move. So it wasn't to immobilize them. I there are elements to this crime that look like things that were done intentionally to humiliate the boys. Them being tied the way they were tied because of the way that it exposes you, and then for
Mm-hmm.
them to be nude. So there is that element. But that the thing is that those are things to be kept at the back of your mind when the case gets reinvestigated. Those are the kinds of questions and things that you want to figure out after exoneration, hopefully that they get exonerated, because otherwise nobody will ever be reinvestigated. This case will never be reinvestigated, let alone have somebody to be prosecuted. But yeah, there are a lot of those. There are elements to this crime that you have questions about that never get answered through Jesse's confession, and they should. And one of the things I do on this channel is I do true crime roast. So I take an interrogation and I add commentary over it. And a lot of times I'm serious, but then criminals will say things in their confessions that are outlandish and ridiculous, and I will make a joke about it. It is what it is. Sometimes you have to have a
Mm-hmm.
little levity when it comes to true crime.
You
And
do.
the more I do, the more interrogations that I watch, and it's all murder, nothing less than homicide. But you could just see the way that people speak, and it's just so missing from Jesse, from his confessions, all of them, all 87 of them, if you believe it was 87. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, I mean, and this is a good theory too. I mean, this is, I think people are, maybe when you looked at it too initially, Chris's injury is so shocking, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it would seem on the surface that he was the target. But when you
He
really
wasn't.
take a step back and you really look at the injuries and you really see who got the worst of it, Stevie Branch got the worst of it.
I
And
think that can be accurately said. Yes.
have you ever, I know what I was going to ask you, have you ever tried to track down Christopher Morgan and Brian Holland?
I haven't. I wrote about what I wrote about. Obviously, I wrote about them
Right.
in the book I wrote, and so I mean, I didn't feel an overwhelming need to do that,
Okay.
and because his story was just as bad as Jesse's. There was as many flaws in it, but the problem for me was, and I use it as comparison, was because obviously with Christopher Morgan, he confessed to the same crime. At least he told a little bit of a story about why he did it.
Mm-hmm.
Jesse doesn't ever say why he did it.
I see.
Why did you do this? And he doesn't ever say.
Right.
Which
I
is
think
crazy. I mean,
it is crazy. He never, and they didn't ask. They never
No,
asked him. They never asked him. And all of the
no,
things that they asked him, including, do you know what a penis is? They did not ask him why. Why did you do
yeah,
this? Well, the reason I'm fascinated by Christopher Morgan and Brian Holland, and it just because I watched Paradise Lost again today, and there's that exchange between Fogelman and Gary Gitchell, which on the surface everybody thinks is funny, but it's actually shady. Gitchell is throwing shade at Fogelman. So he talks about, he asks Gitchell, is there anybody that you're aware of that was interviewed that you knew that there was, that one of the boys had been mutilated, or there was a cut to the face? And Gitchell interrupts and he says, no. And you, Mr. Fogelman, are pointing to the wrong side of the face, and the courtroom laughs. And but it's shade, because there was some contention between the prosecutor's office and the police department. But anyway, not Christopher Morgan, Brian Holland is the only person that's ever accurately said how the boys were tied and what they were tied with.
right.
And the reason that I'm interested in Christopher Morgan and Brian Holland is because there doesn't seem to be any follow through. Now, Chris McDonough, who is the person who interviewed them, is on YouTube, and
Hmm.
I keep saying I'm going to reach out to him, but I don't know what to actually say, because I don't actually want to hear anything. I don't want to know whether he thinks they're guilty or innocent, or I just want to know, when he called Gitchell, what was Gary Gitchell's response to what he relayed to him over the phone? Because then obviously after the phone call, the report came, and it's a very substantial report, as well as the shoes being very well documented. And I believe their shoe sizes are documented too, unlike other people in this case. None of the
Hmm.
shoe sizes are documented. But anyway, and I was always curious about that, because um, the explanation given was that they heard it from Terry Hobbs. And Terry
Mm.
Hobbs was asked, and there is a tiny little report, and the detective is sitting down with Terry and with Pam. Interestingly, they stumbled on Christopher Morgan because of Pam. She
Hmm.
said that, you should talk to this kid. But Terry said, absolutely not. I didn't talk to anybody about anything with respect to what happened to the boys. And that was never like a red flag for anybody. I mean, Chris McDonough did his job. He did what he was asked to do, which was to interview them and polygraph them and
Hmm.
take copious notes. And obviously it was videotaped and it was audio recorded. I have it on my channel. So he did what he was supposed to do, and then he relayed the information, and then nothing ever came of it. And I always
When
wanted to know.
and Jen, do you remember when Brian Holland was actually interviewed and he gave that description?
I will tell you. Give me just 1 second to look at Callahan's, because it's all there. It's weird because the way Callahan's has it done, and I'm not judging Callahan's. Yeah, I know the person that did the did that website, and then now
Hmm.
people still maintain it or whatever. But anyway, I'm not judging. It's the way it's put together, and it's because back in those days, bandwidth, yada yada yada. So Christopher Morgan's stuff is all under, or Brian Holland's stuff is all with Christopher Morgan. So a lot of
Right.
people don't know where to search for him, but it's all there. So I'll tell you when he was uh, interviewed.
Because and I'll just tell you this, sometimes I'm a little reticent in this case about firsthand
It,
accounts from back then, because people were talking so much and telling people. I mean, the police were telling John Mark Byers all sorts of stuff.
yeah, they were the 15th
And
of May.
the 15th of May. Okay, well,
Yes.
that's. I mean, I've read that before. I mean, it's hard to believe that anybody could forget things in a case, but I
Well,
mean,
I forget. Look, I called Joe Bartush Herbert, which there
right,
is a Herbert Bartush.
right.
It's Jason's
Jason's
uncle.
uncle. Yeah. The guy that they said that was their alibi, was that they were
Right.
there mowing the yard.
Right. You know who else I wish could be tracked down? Don Nam, who is Jason's other alibi.
Yes.
Because I've looked at his what he came in and reported, which was the 23rd of December, right? And he said that he saw Jason at Walmart. They were playing video games, yada, 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 right? Then the next day he supposedly comes in, which would be the 24th, which would be Christmas Eve, and changes his entire story. Except for the problem with that is, if you look at the signatures from the 23rd to the 24th, they are different and don't match. And they look to me to be Detective Brian Ridge's handwriting. He has a very distinct cursive, especially if you've been through the case file 11 billion times. And these are those little tiny rabbit holes that are personal to me that I just want to go down and ask, track these people down and find out, did you go back to the police department on Christmas Eve and change your story to it being a different day? Or is it like I suspect and it was changed for you? I do think that was changed.
Yeah, I mean, there's another phenomenon. You asked me, like, what were some other shocking, things that happened in court. I can tell you, obviously, the stuff we just talked about with Peretti was very shocking because he was clearly backtracking. He even understood the gravity of what he did back then, how damaging it was. But another thing that actually there was two that I can think of now that were just mind-blowing to me. Okay. So in the original trials, the two softball girls were considered the most believable witnesses. The jurors universally concluded on this.
Yes, they did.
They were the most believable. Well, the day that they got released from prison, I asked Scott. I said, Scott, could you bring this case to court today? If this happened today. He said, no, I couldn't. He said, because the evidence is stale and too many key witnesses have changed their stories. And I asked him, I said, so as one of those softball girls, was she going to testify in a new trial? And he said, no.
Of course not. Cause she won,
Jen, I have an email from the prosecutor because I followed up with him the next day. So I'd have a record of it.
Yes, good job. Paper trail is you need a paper trail in this case. One of them, didn't one of their mothers say, I know that she was not telling the truth? Yes. Okay. And I can't remember which one it was. Was it Medford or Van Vickle?
If I remember correctly, it was Medford.
Okay. That makes sense. Because I always thought it was interesting that they only heard that specific phrase, that Damien had killed the three boys and he was going to kill one more, and he already had the kid picked out before he turned himself in. Yeah. Now, I think that was Damien at the softball field that night? Yeah, he was. That's not the problem. This is what I have always thought happened that night. I think that the police were coming around quite a lot to Damien, Jason, not as much to Jason because Gail wouldn't let him, but to Damien. And I think what he did was, I think he said something real flip, like, the police think I killed those three boys. They're coming. And I think he made a very off-color, dark humor joke about it. And that is what I actually think was overheard at the roller rink and at the softball field, not an actual factual confession.
Yeah. And here's the thing. So, and this is one thing I don't understand about, like, and again, I'm new to this term, nons. I didn't know that this whole thing existed.
Well, because nobody, like, it's sort of an antiquated term because it was for people who supported the West Memphis Three and getting them out, but now they're out. So we don't have any new terminology. So it's just, we've stuck with supporters and non-supporters.
Okay. Years. So okay. And I'm new to it because I don't get on these Facebook pages and do all this stuff.
Yeah, but it's probably better that you don't. It's messy.
Yeah, because like, I hear about all this money that's being thrown around and people are being paid to do these interviews, and I'm sitting there going, well, I never paid any of these people to talk to me, and they all talked to me and told me the exact same story years before, Joe and Bruce showed back up on the scene, and Amy Berg. I mean, I know Amy Berg. Right. When she did West of Memphis. I mean, she met with me the first time she was in Jonesboro.
Right. And I think it's ludicrous to think that all of these people were bought and paid for. Ridiculous.
Yeah, it's stupid because how much money would it take for you to lie about a child being murdered?
Yeah, there's not.
What would be
There's
your
no
price?
amount. There's no
Yeah,
amount.
what's your price? And here's the thing: a lot of people would have to be lying. And here's the thing: so at the softball field that night, and I agree with you. In fact, I talked to Damien when he was on death row. Him and I actually talked about this for a long time. And I said, "Do you think you were there?" And he goes, "Yeah, I think I was there." And he goes, "I may have said something flippant, like you said." He said, "I may have done that." Here's the thing. When those two girls testified, they said that Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin were talking to a group of people.
Right.
That the people's backs were to them, and they heard this thing. Now, we know for a fact that the girls could not say what was said before the statement
Correct.
or after. And I've also read, and I've never found this, that they couldn't even identify Damian in a police lineup at first. That they couldn't do it, that they kept missing, and then finally, and it was never admitted into court, by the way, which that's a whole nother thing.
Right.
But here's the thing. If you're just a decent, good person and you were in a group of people standing there and Damian Eccles confessed to killing those three and he was going to go kill two more before he was done.
Right.
After all these years, why haven't you stepped forward to say, yeah, I was there and he said it and he meant it?
Right. And not only that, but more to the point, right? The police had this information. There's a police report about the softball girls. Obviously, that's how they got to
Yes.
be testifying in the first place, right? But they interviewed I think like 90% of the teenage population in West Memphis and in Marion. Anybody who ever had any connection to Damian or Jason ever was spoken to. And how did they not run? How did that group of people not get interviewed ever? Just as being there. Do you know what I'm saying? They didn't interview anybody else. It's weird. Okay, Daphne says, I spoke with Jason's girlfriend, Heather Cleette, best friend, who was sitting next to Jason in the stands at the game. And she said Jason and Damian showed no indication of telling that story near the snack bar. I believe it. I think you're exactly right, Daphne. I think that there were some busybody officers who were doing a little more. I think they were very interested in investigating the teenagers, and they were buying into this satanic. I have already banned this bot twice now. This satanic panic angle. I think that's just what I think. Thank you, Team Psychward, for getting them, babe. And I think that it was known in the teenage population, and I think that those girls told a story, and that was that. I don't think they were telling the truth. I don't think that they understood the far-reaching consequences of what they were doing, especially testifying. Maybe I'm sure they do now, which is why they're probably not testifying again. But I think at the time, I think almost anybody you talk to had some kind of run in at one point or another with Damian, and the ones that are documented are negative. I don't know how many that were positive that were not documented, but they were almost, all negative. And and that's the other thing is this. If you listen to Jesse's confession, the last one, the Bible one, right? He has them all meeting up at Lakeshore and walking from Lakeshore to Robin Hood Hills. And I have mapped out that. I even did it on Google Earth and put Google Earth back to 1993 because you can do that. It is a 2.5-hour walk from Lakeshore.
Yes. Here's the thing.
Look at Damian Eccles. Does that boy strike you in 1993 as anybody who walked? Look, I mean, just look at, I'm not trying to body shame. I went through this last night. But the truth of the matter is, do I believe that Jason and Jesse may have walked? Sure. They look like walkers. Damian, not so much.
Okay, so here's the thing, and I actually drove that route one night. I was actually on my way to Memphis to go to a Memphis Grizzlies game, an NBA game. And it was raining, kind of a misty night, and I decided, you know what? I'm on my way over there. I'm just going to drive that route. Okay. I'm just going to drive it and see how long it would take me to drive it. And I ended up in, where the boys' bodies were found is a parking lot of a hotel now.
Yeah.
And I
Is
drove
it
to
a
the
parking lot of a hotel now? They put
yes,
something there?
yes.
Oh, wow.
And so I drove to the very spot, and I looked around. I had some friends with me, and I'm like, "Do you believe?" And we guesstimated. This is years ago. I mean, Google Earth may have existed back then, but I definitely didn't know about it.
Right.
We estimated that it would take about 2.5 hours to walk to that spot.
Yeah.
And I looked at my buddies and I said, "Guys, so you're telling me that these 3 kids from a trailer park, there's no internet, there's no CSI, there's none of the things we have now,
Right.
that they walked 2.5 hours, slaughtered these 3 kids, cleaned the scene up CSI style,
Yeah.
and then walked home and left no evidence of them being at the crime scene there."
Right.
And Christopher Byers, he bled.
Right.
Whatever happened to him, he bled.
He did.
And there was no blood recovered from the scene. I said, and here's the thing, they keep talking about, like that they had this 3 to 4 hour window and that they don't have an alibi. Well, here's the problem. Most people don't have good alibis for where they're at. Number one.
No.
They
don't.
It's like if you're at home with your spouse, let's say, and something happens, the only person who can say that you were home that night is your spouse.
Right, exactly.
So you don't have this list of people who can say, "Oh, I was here verifiably."
Right.
And so the fact that, but we know, and I was in the courtroom when Jennifer Bearden testified, and I talked to her, and I said, "Jennifer," I said, "just tell me the truth. Did you talk to him that night on the phone?" And she said, "Absolutely." She said, "There's no question about it." She goes, "That's why I got in trouble with my parents. It's because they found out I was talking to this guy a couple weeks later, and in the whole story." And so to think that all these people would just show up to lie for Damien Echols is
preposterous.
It's preposterous. Why would anybody show up to lie for a child killer? Why would anybody do that?
Right, exactly.
I mean, the funny thing is everybody who's listening to this right now, you don't know anybody who would be that cruel or that awful. But then you think there's this whole group of people like like that Dr. Richard Souveren or Michael Bodden.
Right.
Listen, and I understand that they testify in cases and they're usually brought in as defense experts. And so they're cast in that light.
Right.
But I can tell you right now, my opinions or the things I've written about this case, and you talked about Jesse putting his hand on the Bible. The story I wrote for the Associated Press started with this. With a Bible, with his hand on a Bible, Jesse Misskelley Jr. described how he ruthlessly helped to kill 3 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1993. So I'm not in the bag for anybody. That's what was testified to in court, and was presented in court. That's what I wrote.
That's what you should have wrote. You reported the facts. That's what happened.
Right. Yeah. And that's the other thing. Daphne just said Bearden is now an attorney. She was going into law school when she testified, and I said it at the time. I said it in the courtroom. I said, "So you're going to tell me that she's going to get up there and lie to protect a child killer, and then imperil her ability to become a lawyer? Because if you lie on the stand, you can't
ever be a lawyer.
You'll never get a law license, so
Ever.
You won't be able to practice law. So why would everybody? I don't understand why they think everybody would destroy their lives and their reputations to protect somebody." And I told Damien Echols to his face on death row, I said, "Damien, I could never definitively say you didn't do it for one simple reason. I wasn't there."
Exactly. None of us can. Nobody can say with 100% certainty anything happened or didn't happen unless you were there. So none of us, everything that we're arguing is conjecture, and it's our perception of the evidence. There isn't a secret vault of evidence that people who believe the West Memphis 3 are guilty have seen that we all haven't, that we don't have access to. That there's no evidence that.
And Jen, that is one thing I've seen since I've actually joined some of these pages and seen some of this stuff, is that they think there's this whole like underground vault of evidence that Paradise Lost, the directors missed, that the people that they never bring up, and the funny thing is, like when you're in the Rule 37, so this is how it works. In Rule 37, it's the last ditch effort to get a new trial for an appeal. Right. And basically what you go in there and you do is you throw every argument on the wall and say, okay, this is why we didn't do it. It comes down, my attorneys were incompetent. They didn't consider this. They didn't consider that, which I will say this. Their attorneys did a really poor job. And I hate to say that, but they did a bad job. I mean, they didn't bring up just some fundamental things. I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I've been in a lot of courtrooms, and just some stuff that they didn't bring up was just preposterous.
But then some of the stuff they did try, there were a lot of times that they did try, and they were just, their hands were just tied. Like Paul Ford, trying to get Griffiths to not be a expert an expert witness, and here comes Judge Burnett. Well, I'm not sure that you have to have a degree to be considered an expert in the state of Arkansas. Like, come on,
you do.
Come on, Judge Burnett, stop playing with these people out here.
And even some small things that don't seem that big. There was a theory, and this doesn't come out in the documentaries well enough, and I've talked to a lot of people about this. There was a theory that if somehow the jury had a real problem with Jason Baldwin.
Yeah, they did. We're going to get to you, Davidas, because this is an excellent question.
Yeah, they had a problem with Jason Baldwin.
Yeah, they did.
They really didn't think he did it.
Right.
And they understood there was the only reason that he was even considered a suspect was his association to Damien.
Correct.
And so they had a real problem. And how you can watch this play out in real time, go back and read the Nerling Hollingsworth testimony. Go to the second part. There's a part in there where Paul Ford says, okay, Judge, I want you to give the jury an instruction. She said that she saw Dominique. She didn't say she saw Jason. The prosecutor is going to try to make the case to them that it is Jason. I want you to give them an instruction that says they can only consider her testimony in relevance to Damien, that it can't do Jason.
Right.
And that he had given the same instruction the day before for Michael Carson's testimony that could only be applied to Baldwin.
Right, exactly.
If you take away the Hollingsworth clan's claims, Jason Baldwin doesn't get convicted.
No, and you know
what? And they knew that.
Yeah. And this is the other thing.
And they thought it would be an unraveling thing where if they're in the jury room and they're saying, well, Jason didn't do it, then all of a sudden they would start looking at Damien and saying,
exactly.
And here's what's crazy. So I've made this argument before. Damien and Jason would have been better off if Jesse had testified.
They would have.
They would have been better off.
In a weird, messed up way. They would have been. And this is the other part that, because Daphne and I were talking about this the other day, because I ask for help. Because they know they know they remember all the things. And if they don't remember it, they know how to find it. And they're always helping me. Great people. So anyway, we were talking about the necklace because Bloom Tick Bloom had said, oh, hey, Jen, Terry Hobbs did an interview and I want you to go listen to it. So I was listening to it. And Terry Hobbs, okay, it's not a lie what he says about the necklace. Okay. Yes. Damien Eccles' blood was found on the necklace. And there was a spot of blood that matched the blood type of both Stevie Branch and Jason Baldwin. But the way that Terry puts it is the necklace had my son's blood on it, which isn't a lie, but it isn't also the whole truth, right? So I went down this whole rabbit hole, and Daphne sent me the link to the Paradise Lost 3 where Fogelman, Brent Davis, Paul Ford, and Wadley, I think, are in that motel room, and they're having that exchange. And I so wish that Ford would have just shut his mouth. Let them look, they had it tested. You know what the results are. Just hush. Let them go to Judge Burnett, and let Judge Burnett let them admit that into evidence and immediately file for a separation right then.
Yeah.
To separate those cases. That's why Fogelman didn't.
I heard you say that, and I was actually at the gym working out when you said it, and I actually was listening to it, and I was like talking to you, even though I wasn't talking to you. He would have bifurcated that trial. It would have happened. There's no question about it. He would have had to have.
He would have had to have, and that's why I was like, right. I'm yelling at the TV at my phone because I'm watching on my phone. Shut up, Ford! Don't say that. Don't. Oh, why did you say that? Because I'm thinking to myself. Then they have to separate the trials. There's no way that Burnett would not be able to rule that way, and they needed to try them together in order to convict Jason. And this is the other thing. I know that you sat through the Rule 37, so you know the ins and outs and stuff, especially with Dan Stidham testifying for Jesse.
Mm-hmm.
Was okay. There's been an argument that Jesse Miss Kelly had no incentive or motivation to confess with the Bible confession, right?
Mm-hmm.
Other than because he wanted something done about it, right? He out of the goodness of his heart. However, I argue, and so do other people, that Jesse had a huge incentive. He had just been convicted, and the prosecution was working on making a deal with him. And the argument, and I remember distinctly in Paradise Lost one, and I watched it again today, where Brent Davis, but mainly Fogelman, is talking about Jesse testifying, that they need his testimony, and that they were considering taking life off of his sentence. So, do
Yes.
you know, is there something more concrete somewhere, and that maybe I can show people that yes, they were going to try to work a deal with him? Other than that
I
you
can
know of,
I can tell you this right now. I don't know of specifically where I could find it in concrete because I've actually talked to Dan about this.
right?
But here's the thing: nobody who's been convicted of murder is going to testify in another person's case without getting something out of it.
Well, Michael Carson did, remember, because he got that soft
Yeah,
heart.
yeah, and that whole I saw people say that he was paid by Amy Berg to do what he did. Well, here's the thing:
Ugh.
I talked to him years before he talked to Amy Berg, and he told me the same thing. So
So Carson was paid by Amy Berg. So then was the lady who was also in west of Memphis, who worked at the detention center, who said that when the boys saw Michael Carson's testimony, they were livid and they called him a liar. Did she get paid to lie too and risk her job? Did she get
must.
paid to lie and say her supervisor said, Joyce, this is how it is. Clinton County fucked up, and now we got to clean up. So she was paid to say that too? Okay. Everybody was
Yeah.
paid.
You know, it's funny. Brent Davis, part of his prosecution, whenever an expert witness would get on the stand, is he would say, "So, how much do you get paid an hour?"
Yes, he did.
And you know what's funny to me? You know what I would have said if I was the counselor, if I was the defense attorney? I would have said, "Objection, Your Honor. Everybody in here is getting paid,
Correct.
including the prosecutor. So, how's that relevant?"
Exactly. That's when Offshay was testifying. Here comes Brent Davis.
Yeah.
Dr. Offshay, is your going rate $300 an hour? And
Yeah.
he said, no, that's not correct. So you don't get to $300 until you testify. Meanwhile, let's bring in
Yeah.
Griffiths and let him testify about the hair painted black, the
Oh,
nails
and you know
painted
what's so
black,
listen, and Jen, this is what's so funny to me is that you can read documents from a court case and you can get an idea of the arguments that are made,
right?
but you don't get a flavor of the atmosphere in the room. Like when Victoria Hutchinson walked into that courtroom, there was a gasp. Like nobody could believe she was actually going to get on the stand and do it.
I couldn't believe she did.
And well, here's the thing: they didn't let her testify because they wouldn't offer her immunity. I was the one that suggested it. I said, and it was all quiet. And I said, well, just give her, because they couldn't determine if she was committing perjury then or now. And so they called a recess, and I was just standing over there, and I said, just offer her immunity. You could do that and just get to the truth. They didn't do that, and she didn't testify. But when she came in, I'll never forget, John Mark Byers was sitting right next to me, and he goes, man, that's the bitch that started all this. And I was like,
yes.
And so the thing that got me the most is when they tried to argue that the reason that the West Memphis Three were convicted was because they said the prosecutors in the Rule 37 was like, oh no, we didn't argue that this was a satanic or an occult killing.
Yes, they did. In fact, they were asked to prove by Judge Burnett in so much that they would be required to prove motive if they could. It's in Paradise Lost. Do you know what should happen? This is what we should really do, us people. We need to lobby Joe Berlinger. He has the entire trial, both of them, all of them, all of the footage. Release it. Release it. Play
I
the
haven't
trial
talked.
for
I
everybody.
haven't talked to Joe in a while, but I mean that's a possibility. I mean, the last time I saw him, he was filming something, and I was asking some questions. It was a different. I can't remember what it was. He was filming something, and I signed a release because I'd asked a couple questions he wanted to use on one of his films. Of course, he did the Ted Bundy tapes right after
Yeah,
that,
and
so
he just did the Gacy ones.
he did.
That was really good. He did a
It
really good
was.
job.
Well, Dr. Suverin, the
Yes.
old oncologist who
Oh, yeah.
nailed Bundy.
Yep.
He told me. I asked him one time. I said, "So what do you think about this case?" And he told me this was the stupidest case he'd ever seen. And I was like,
It's
"Really?"
That's why I didn't believe it was an actual, like, when I saw it the first time, I couldn't believe this sounded made up.
Yeah.
I just let's see. Oh, by the way, I never understood how Jesse's alibi being at the wrestling game that evening and there were testimonies from his friends in court wasn't taken into account. Does anyone know?
It's again. It was absolutely the defense did a horrible job. They didn't. Jennifer Bearden was never called. I mean, there was a bunch of people they could have called to at least mount some type of an alibi defense. And I have never talked to Dan about that specific aspect, but he did admit that he made mistakes. At
He
least
did,
he was
and
honest.
he said it was from lack of experience. This was his,
Yeah,
this was a
he was
huge case
27.
for him.
He looks very mature. I don't think he looks old in the docs, but he
No.
looks mature. He looks like a guy who's been in a courtroom for 10 years.
I thought I was very surprised at the at the Rule 37 hearing and his testimony about just how it's one thing to never have tried a capital crime before, okay, which I knew that it was his first one, right? But to have only ever done plea deals.
No. It's more severe than that. He had never tried a felony crime.
Oh, that's right, a felony too. That's
yeah,
right.
it was more than capital. He had never tried a felony crime.
Yeah, I remember it being pretty deep. Yeah, so bless his heart. I mean, and I think what he focused on was really the false confession, and I think he really thought that by explaining to the jury that they do exist and showing the elements of Jesse's confession that were false and how it happened, I think he thought that the jury would get it, and they just didn't. And let's be honest, let's be fair to the jury here. When you are a juror, you are supposed to listen to only the evidence presented in court, which actually Ridge making the admission of Jesse's confession up on the stand like that should have resulted in an immediate mistrial, and Burnett wouldn't grant it, but it should have happened. That was a fundamental trial error, a huge one. But anyway.
Jen, I'm about to cough. I'm going to step away for just 1 second. Hold on.
Okay. Can you imagine being on that jury and being the holdout? And that's another thing I caught today when I was watching Paradise Lost, the first one. So they read the verdict in Damien and Jason's trial. It happened in their trial specifically. And Judge Burnett, which is normal, he reads out loud the jury foreman's name, but normally that is withheld. It was never censored from the original film, which I always thought was just a little weird thing. But I don't think that the way that the hype was around this case and as emotional as this case was, I don't think that I wouldn't have wanted to be. I would have done it, but I wouldn't have wanted to do it. I wouldn't have wanted to be the lone holdout on that jury. I think there was intense pressure for them to convict.
Yeah, no, there was. And here's the thing. Once the Jesse Misskelley Jr. confession was brought into the jury room, it was over. I mean, it was over. Ken Arnold one time told me, him and I were getting into it because I talked to him many times about this case. And one time we were getting into it, and he goes, well, it's easy to say that they didn't do it now that we know that we know.
Right.
And I said, yeah. I said, but even looking at the case from the perspective of back then, what was known, I said, how could a responsible person?
Right.
I mean, this is the most serious thing we do in this country is we put somebody away in a cage for the rest of their life, or we take their life away from them. I've been on death row. I've been there for executions.
Yeah.
It's a serious, solemn thing.
Yeah, it
I mean, I
is.
hear people all the time say, "Oh man, I wish I could go to an execution."
No,
I'm
you
like,
don't.
no, you
No,
don't.
you don't. No, you don't.
Trust me, you don't want. And I've been to 3,
I've never
and
attended one, but I would never want to.
yeah, I mean, and okay, has George ever? Yeah, I've interviewed David Jacoby over the phone before. And this was probably back 2009-ish, maybe 2010. I have to go back and look, but yeah, I have. Yeah, and pretty much everything you know about him disputing the timeline is what he told me.
I think he wants your opinion
Oh,
on the discrepancies.
Well, here's the thing.
I already like you a lot, George. You say "here's the thing" a lot, and I say that too.
Okay, good. Must be a Southern thing, right?
It must be.
I don't. Okay, I've done this long enough to know that trusting people's memories can be a bad. It can be. You need to get this information as soon as it happens. And that's why the police did a abhorrent job of interviewing people from the beginning. Like they could have canvassed the neighborhood better. There were obviously people they missed. They didn't
They
interview
missed
the
the whole
parents.
neighborhood. They missed
Yeah.
Stevie's
Yeah.
neighborhood.
And here's the thing, and I think I'm not going to tell you guys anything that you don't already know, but when a child is murdered, overwhelmingly the perpetrator is known to the child and is related to that child.
Right.
Okay, there is no question about it. And so from the beginning, all of the parents should have been interviewed. All of them. Even
Yes.
Todd Moore, because here's the thing
Yes.
about Todd. He may have been out of state. That didn't mean he didn't orchestrate the murder for some reason.
You're
He
right.
could've.
I mean, it's possible. You're absolutely
Yeah.
right.
So you bring them in, and that's your pyramid. You start there. It's an inverted pyramid. So you start with
Right.
the parents, and then you work your way down.
Right.
And so here's the thing about David Jacoby. I think that he's probably telling the truth as he sees it, and that's fine. John Mark Byers told the truth as he sees it in relation to Terry's timeline, and Terry tells the truth as he sees it. And this is why we have a jury.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was ever to go to court, then they get to decide, okay, Dana didn't mention it. John didn't, says it didn't happen. David says this happened. Now Terry says this happened. Okay. And that's when it all gets decided. There was one thing though, that Jim did say that, I thought you might find interesting, Jen. It just popped into my head as I was over there coughing.
Okay.
I'm
sorry you were choking, by the way.
I have no idea why. I'm just so he did say one thing that did boggle his mind about this case.
Okay.
He said, in all the history of all the world that we know,
right
before this moment,
okay,
there's not one single case of 3 suspects killing 3 little kids in a satanic or an occult ceremony. It's never happened.
Correct.
And to our knowledge, it's never happened since.
Correct.
He said, so how can this one case be so different than everything we know about this kind of stuff? How can it be the only one that this happened? He said, is this a case of one person being murdered and the 2 witnesses being taken out because they can identify the murderer?
Correct. That's what I've always thought it was.
And he said it like that. And I said, I never thought about it that way. And so I thought that's an interesting way of looking at it.
That's also the argument that nons make for guilt, because no crime has happened before this, like this, and no crime has happened since this. But if you're not looking at the crime the right way, if you're not looking at the evidence as it is, and you're looking at, if you think about it in the broadest terms, a ritual is just something that somebody does, right? And it can be like, for me, I get up every single morning and I have a 5-hour and a cigarette. Then I come in, I make a cup of coffee, I have a cup of coffee and a cigarette. That's my morning routine ritual, right? Mm-hmm. So even if it wasn't a sacrifice according to the satanic, Bible is probably not the right word, but what the teaching, a true satanic, it's possible that it could have been different rituals put together, borrowed from different ideologies, right? But
Hmm.
that's not what happened here. It's ludicrous.
No.
There was no, not, I mean, there are some that those knots and that hog tying is significant and it means something to whoever did this, but not to Damien, Jason, or Jesse. There was no need for those boys to be tied. If everything happened at that site, like the prosecution has always said that it has,
Hmm.
why would they be tied at all? I was thinking about this last night.
Why didn't you just hold them under the water and drown them?
Why didn't you use one of the 11 billion logs to hold them down
Right. Well, you need to
that
do
were
that.
available?
If you're obviously in the water, they said, the claim the Hollingsworth clan made was that they were covered in mud and that they
Right.
were, and so they obviously were wet.
Right.
Why wouldn't you just hold the kid underwater to make sure he died?
Right. But what would be the point of tying them up? Tying there, the state has said that there were 3 children, which that's undisputable, but that there were 3 perpetrators, 1 child for each perpetrator. So what would be the need to restrain any of the children? Because even if you look at Jesse's confession, he has 1 kid with 1 person at all times. It's
Yeah.
never like Damien and Jason are attacking 1 child or Jason and Jesse are attacking 1 child. It's 1 kid for each perpetrator. So what would be the
I'll
need
tell you
for
what,
restraint?
I can tell you a piece of evidence that points to exactly what you're alluding to. One thing that was brought out in those hearings was the fact that there were not really any bruising around the wrists
Right.
or the ankles.
Right.
And it's because by the time they had been tied, they were already subdued.
Exactly. So they didn't struggle against them.
Right. So what was the point of tying them up if they were already unconscious?
Exactly, which is why I've always said that the only 2 things that make sense to me are the way that they were tied was for transporting. If one theory I've had is that the creek was only temporary. It was a place to put them for a moment while the actual crime scene could be cleaned up. And I thought that the killers may have intended to return and use like one of those logs and stick the log and scoop them up with the shoelaces. You know what I'm saying? Like you know what I mean? And then put their bodies in 10 Mile Bayou. But that would have been a much better body of water to hide them in long term. It would have taken a while before they were found there.
Yeah, here's the thing though, I can tell you this, and I know this from a lot of psychology. I've talked to a lot of people who are experts in psychology of a killer, and I've talked to a bunch of them. And there's a real strange phenomenon. Most killers, when they transport a victim, if they move a victim at all, they will only move them within a 10-mile radius of where they live. And it's always within that radius, and it's usually much shorter because your mind can only handle having a dead body in your car or vehicle or in your presence that you've murdered for so long. It's like a ticky, tick, 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 and then you got to get rid of it.
Right.
And so,
unless you tote. Anthony Tote, he was in that house for 10 days with his whole family.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to the rule.
That's different. Yeah, but I mean, it just hit me.
I actually covered a case a couple of years ago where a dude murdered his girlfriend and her dead body was in the house, and they were kind of like highfalutin, like he was a businessman and she owned her own business and they had money, and he killed her.
I'm listening. Go ahead. Sorry, I just had a thought.
And he actually for a week was living in the house and she was in there dead. And finally he fled to Florida. He was in Miami. He was getting ready to fly overseas and they finally caught him.
Oh, wow.
But most of the time when they move a body, that's it. They're going to move it and then they're done. Because here's the thing. If those boys were unconscious when they're put into the creek, you could use a stick, like you said, and just hold them down in the water, hold their head down. And within a minute and a half, they're dead.
Right. But what I'm saying is one of the theories is that the reason, if they weren't tied to restrain them, okay, what would be why would they be tied? And the only thing that I can think of would be to pick them up and carry, for transport. So I've always thought that maybe they intended to use this, like the way they were tied, to scoop them up with the stick.
Mhm.
And the 10 Mile Bayou is not far from where they were found. That would be a quick, because Ted Bundy moved bodies a couple of times, but
this is different.
this is not
You're
this is
in an
not
urban
Bundy.
area, and there's
But then at the
also
same time, the
there's parents
risk.
looking too. You got
That's
to
what I was thinking too. And I was thinking last night, whoever did this, the one element, I mean, obviously, statistically speaking, and you don't even have to, it's not rocket surgery to know this. Children, when they're missed, the younger they are, the quicker they're missed. So I think the element that the killer did not count on was Mark Byers, and how quickly Christopher was missed, and how much looking John Mark Byers did, and how he wanted help from jump. He knew something was wrong from jump. And I will be the first person to admit that when I first started looking at this case, really, I had already, at this point, I had made up my mind that Jason, Jesse, and Damien didn't do it. And I started looking at John Mark Byers. I did. I will be the first person to admit that initially I thought that I read his cries for help, his pleas, completely wrong. I will be the first person to admit that. I thought that he wanted help immediately, and it was a sign of guilt, and I read it wrong.
Yeah.
But
I actually told supporters I'd go to court, and they still thought John Mark Byers had something to do with it. And I said, guys, I can tell you this right now. I've covered a lot of murders. You know who the last person who wants the police getting involved in a murder is? The person who did it.
Well, right. And John Mark Byers wanted help. Like, I mean, from any law enforcement.
He said, send everybody. He said, my kid would not run away. Get out here now.
He is, yes, Daphne Blake. Here's here's the other thing. He was flagging down officers. At the Flash Market, he was flagging down an officer. At the Blue Beacon, he was flagging down officers. He was trying to get the cops involved from jump. So yeah, I initially, hey Rachel, I initially misread that. I'm the first person to admit it. I think that's the person who did this didn't count on John Mark Byers. I think they thought they had a little bit more time. What would be very, very helpful, Dr. Peretti, if you're out there and you're listening, could you narrow the timeline down, or the time of death down? Could you at least pick one time of death rather than testifying to one at one trial and one at another? Could you pick one? Because that would help. It's very difficult to figure out your list of suspects if you don't know when the person has passed away, when they were murdered.
Yeah, and here's the thing. We just need
like a 4 to 6 hour work. I can work with that.
Yeah, I mean, determining time of death can always be a little tricky, but if you're determining the time of death of the same people in two different trials, and I've done this before. I've covered a trial where a whole family of 4 was slaughtered by this father and son, and so I sat in the court. I've actually done this exercise where I've heard the entire case presented against one and then the other, and you would be shocked. Oh, and you won't believe this. You know who the medical examiner was in that case?
If you tell me, Dr. Peretti, I'm quitting the internet.
Dr. Frank Peretti.
Oh my God.
And here's the thing: he was really good in that case. Like I listened to him, and this was after West Memphis 3, and I was like, man, how can you be so good in this case? Like, sound competent and sound like you did your job well. You know what I think? I think there was so much pressure on all of them that they started, like, if you're going to be good in sales, you're going to have to push the envelope a little bit into dishonesty.
Right.
Right. Anybody who's good at sales is pushing the envelope.
They do lie a little bit.
They do. And so in this case, he says it. Dr. Peretti said it. He knew this case, as soon as the 3 boys, he knew this was going to go on and on and on forever, years and years and years. And what I think happened is, like a good example, no one can ever explain this. And it's you can read this in the case file. So they had they were going to do overlays of the knife and compare them to the wounds to Christopher Byers, right?
Yes.
And magically the overlays never happened. And for some reason, which makes no sense because they promised these overlays and then they didn't happen, Dr. Peretti is asked, okay, did you have these overlays, especially for Miss Kelly? There was no, because they talk about the knife almost not at all in Miss Kelly, and they're talking about the knife the whole time
Right.
in Damien and Jesse's trial, or Damien and Jason's trial.
Mm-hmm.
And this overlay thing never happened. And one of the defense attorneys says, you know what I think might have happened? I think you did the overlay experiment. And I think you came to the conclusion that these did not match up at all. And so you just decided to scrap it.
That's what I think as well.
Yeah.
That's what I think happened. I will say this. When you do look at the case files, especially when you go to the section marked West Memphis Police Department, there is, Gary Gitchell was exceedingly frustrated. And he was on the phone trying to get a hold of Dr. Peretti a ton, because you can't, until you know what happened, you can't begin to look for suspects. And there was a public outcry. There were 3 8-year-olds brutally murdered. And he was under a lot of pressure. But I think what happened, I think that they were pressuring each other. Interestingly, unintentionally, Dr. Peretti needed time to perform a thorough autopsy, right? Mm-hmm. And that's under the one is difficult. 3 is extremely difficult. And then you have Gitchell calling him, then, and he's rushing him, and they want answers. And, I think that's what happened. Honestly, I don't think, I think that for some people who believe that it was this like high level of corruption, as if they intentionally set out to destroy Damien, Jason, and Jesse's lives. And I don't think that's the case. What I do think is, I think there was fundamental, there was a lot of pressure, and I think that things fell by the wayside, important fundamental things that shouldn't have and did. But I don't think that there was this like crazy level of corruption, like this Damien was set up. I don't think that's what happened. I think they made the facts fit the narrative to make Damien appear guilty in court. Absolutely. And get enough to secure from Jesse's confession, which, by the way, if his confession is so great, how come Jesse had to go back and give a second clarification statement? Because that did happen. The audio is available on Callahan's. The judge said, this is not enough. You need to go back, and because he couldn't understand the time problem either. And that's why there's that second clarification exists. That audio exists because there wasn't enough to secure warrants for Jason and Damien. That's really happened. If you want to, if you really want to take a, real good look at it.
Jen, like what I try to do, and this sounds crazy, but when I'm looking at a case like this, and I write about business, politics, economics, agriculture. I write about a lot of different things. I write a lot of it about entertainment stories. In fact, I'm going to do a story with Barbara Eden later this week.
Oh, really? Well,
yes.
Send me the link because I want to read it.
Okay. I did a story with William Shatner a couple months ago. And,
did you send me those links? I want to read them.
Yeah, I'll send them to you. What I try to do when I look at these cases is if I was like an alien civilization and I was coming to the earth just to study criminology, like human criminology, okay? Mm-hmm. And I drop down into this case, what would make the most sense if I was just trying to approach this from a neutral, like unbiased bystander
like
perspective?
Like Occam's razor?
Yeah. What is the simplest, easiest explanation? So you said that you don't think that they were corruptly going after Damien Echols.
No.
You may be right, but I will tell you this, and this is very simple to me. Let's say I commit a crime.
Okay.
Right now, I'm sitting here talking to you and I commit a crime. Now, for the police to figure out that I committed a crime immediately, there would have to be a couple of elements. There's a couple ways you could go about it. First of all, we're talking to each other. You guys can see me right now. Mm-hmm. You see me commit the crime. So then you go to the police and say, hey, George committed this crime. And they go, okay, let's go find George and he's a suspect. The second would be, somebody walks in here and sees that a crime is committed. I'm not here, but my wallet's here, my phone's here, my computer's here. This is my office. So they say, okay, George should be a suspect. Look at all this.
Right.
Now, a third way they could do it is I could go down to the police station and say, hey guys, I committed a crime in my office.
Right.
And
Okay.
so those are basically the three ways that you immediately come to a conclusion of finding a suspect. Now, without that, the only way you can come that you can develop a suspect is you have to open an investigation. You have to go and talk to people, and you have
Right.
to analyze evidence. You have to do all this other stuff. When was the first time they visited Damien Eccles?
May 7th.
May 7th, 1993. And that
Yes.
always stood out to me like a really sore thumb because I know how
Right.
this process works. And I was like, why would you already be talking to him? You don't have, okay, so evidence has to be analyzed
Right.
at a crime lab. That takes time.
Correct.
The
Correct.
autopsies weren't even officially done until May 25th.
Correct.
So without the other three elements, this is a slow process. You would go out and canvas and start talking to people for sure.
Right.
But Damien Eccles, like you said, by foot lived 2.5 hours away from the crime, and he had no relation.
I mean, he didn't. Jason did. Damien lived closer because he was at Broadway, so that's a closer trailer park. But it's not,
Right.
But still, yeah, I know. I take your meaning.
Right, and here's the thing: he has no connection to the victims at all.
No, he doesn't. And he lived in a trailer park where he had access to other kids. So did Jason and Jesse.
Right, they literally lived in a different town, which I know that they bounce back and forth between Marion and West Memphis. But I've always said they should be called the Marion Three because they weren't really in West Memphis. They predominantly lived in Marion.
Correct.
And the thing about it is that they have no connection to those kids. Well, an alien from another planet would go, well, according to your own statistics, when a child's murdered, it's someone who's connected to the child.
Right.
But they had already honed in on him. So.
Oh, Daphne just gave you a good review. Good.
Oh.
Highly recommend. Well, I'm definitely going to get it. And then I'm going to send it to you, George, for an autograph after I've read it.
I'll sign it. Okay,
okay. The police is not the same as Steve Jones and Jerry Driver. The police were not looking at Damien Eccles. Jerry Driver and Steve Jones were. And they happened to talk to I just went over this yesterday. Which detective was it? Help me out, Daphne, that went out there and talked to Jason on the Damien on the 7th.
Is it Sudbury, maybe?
Sudbury, that's who it was.
Yeah.
Sudbury.
Yeah, I think it's Sudbury.
So Steve Jones and Sudbury are standing around the West Memphis Police Department, just chitty-chatting about this awful crime that has just taken place. Which, by the way, Steve Jones is the one that called in the shoe.
Yes.
So they're talking about it, just clucking, just two clucking hens up there at the West Memphis Police Department, and they get to talking, and then they both start to agree that this has a satanic cult, CULT, because they interchange the word cult and occult frequently
right.
in this state, as if they mean the same thing. That's how this all started. And let me tell you where the blame goes squarely for that. Damien Eccles. Because let me say this. This is what I think really happened. This is why I think Driver had it in for Damien. Because when Damien was on probation and Jerry Driver was his probation officer, I think that Driver thought that there was that satanic panic was an actual thing. I do. I think he believed that like in his soul.
Yeah. No, it was a phenomenon around the country.
Mm-hmm.
People believed it. It was a thing. You remember, I mean, we're the same age. I mean, you remember it was,
I do.
It was talked about. I mean, it was in schools. I mean, I remember talking. I always
thought it was bullshit. I thought, what are these people talking about? This doesn't know. Do people believe in Satan? Yes. But what they're saying is happening. I always thought it was baloney. But anyway, so he does. So Jerry Driver really does think that Satanists live in West Memphis West Memphis. And he starts asking Damien about it. And Damien always had a tood because he was on probation in the first place, all because Deanna ran away from home and they got caught together in that abandoned trailer at Lakeshore. So Damien took a charge of burglary because the home was abandoned, but it wasn't his home, so broken in. right? So he's in trouble. And I think what he did was, I think he blew a bunch of smoke up Jerry Driver's ass. I really do, during their
Mm-hmm.
probation meetings. And I think that on some level, I kind of think that Jerry Driver was a little shocked that Damien got prosecuted in the first place. I think he only intended for them to go and hassle Damien, but I don't think he thought it was going to be, I don't think he thought it was going to be like this. Because even Jones, like in west of Memphis, is walking back everything that, not Jerry Driver, though. He's right there in purgatory saying, oh, yes, Satanists everywhere in West Memphis. I had to go on my off days and mark the calendars for the full moons and drive around. And I never saw anything or caught any of these Satanists because
Yeah.
they're that good.
I actually think that I think they thought he did it.
You think
And
you think that
then
maybe they
I
did?
think that, yeah, they did. They thought he did it. And then what happened is as more of this stuff came out, they got caught with their quote unquote pants down. And
Literally and figuratively, some of these people.
some of these people, exactly right. And, it's funny. I interviewed, Russ Faria. Did you ever see that show, The Thing About Pam?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Well, Russ came onto my podcast a few weeks ago. And he talked about, of course, he was in prison for 4 years because this crazy Pam woman
Yes.
Framed him for the murder of his wife.
Yes.
And one of the things in that was that, you saw the show. I mean, I didn't.
Yeah.
I had not seen the show until after I interviewed Russ. It was actually a pretty good show.
It was a really good show.
Yeah. And so, but anyway, you can't make up the stuff in that case.
No,
lead detective and
crazy.
And the prosecutor were having an affair and all this other stuff. I'm just like,
yes.
And some of that crap, well, not with the prosecutor and investigators, but there was all sorts of unsavory things going on between these people.
There was, especially some of these juvenile probation officers.
Yeah, and there was a lot of corruption going on in West Memphis at the time. And no, I think these guys. The thing about it is when you talk to them, I talked to Judge Burnett the day those guys got out because he wasn't the judge obviously in the room.
No, but he was. Well, how was he? I'm curious. I feel like he was salty.
He was. I said, "What would you say to Damien Eccles if you saw him right now?" He goes, "I don't know what I would say to him, but I would definitely say something." And you could just feel it. Like you could just, it was in him. And to this day, he believes they're guilty. There is no question. There's no question in his mind.
He does. His argument that they got a fair trial was that there were 12 jurors that convicted him, and that's evidence of a fair trial. And I'm like, Judge Burnett, please stop playing with these people out here. Did you watch the same trial I was watching, Judge Burnett? Because there were rulings that you made that were wrong. They were. I'm not even a lawyer, and I've watched enough trials to know that especially when Ridge accidentally on purpose mentions Jesse's confession on the stand. And
that's a mistrial right there.
That should have been a mistrial. And it was asked and it should have been granted, period. And it wasn't. And then there were other, like Michael Carson. The defense should have been allowed to put the counselor on the stand to testify as to how, and let the jury decide whether they believe that Michael Carson knew this information firsthand or he got it from the counselor. That's what the jury is there for.
And they could have made a special provision when the counselor testified that it would be a closed court.
Correct. Exactly.
Because it was involving a juvenile, and they can do that.
Correct.
And this is the thing, Jen, I tell people this all the time. I am an advocate for professional jurors in the United States, and I'm going to tell you why. Because the last thing in the world you want is a plumber, a teacher, a social worker, a business owner, a bunch of people who are really good at what they do. I'm sure all of them are good at what they do. I'll tell you what they've never been in their life is a courtroom.
No.
And the way they weigh like importance is whatever the judge says is here, whatever the prosecutor says is here, and whatever the defense attorneys say is here. And that's the way they stack it. And I've seen it happen too many times. I've covered an assault case one time where this woman was quite literally nearly beaten to death by her boyfriend. And he was charged with like felony aggravated assault, and he was also charged with misdemeanor aggravated assault and domestic battery, a bunch of other things. But there was like a corresponding felony charge with the misdemeanor charge. Okay.
Right.
So they go to trial. So I'm in there, and the guy's going to testify in his own defense. He said that this woman who had like 8 broken fingers had taken a hammer and smashed all of her fingers on one hand, and then with her broken up hand,
I see.
had taken a toilet lid and was smashing the other and breaking these 3 fingers. She had broken ribs, she had broken legs, she had broken arm.
Oh my gosh.
Her face, you couldn't even recognize her.
Poor thing.
So the dude gets up there and gives us this, tells the jury this, and I'm just like looking at him like, come on, man. So I'm getting ready to leave because the jury gets it. They're going into the jury room, and the bailiff is sitting in front of the door, and he grabs me by the arm. He goes, "Don't go anywhere." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Nobody's buying that story." And he goes, "Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this." And I was like, "Okay." So they come out. They find him guilty on all the misdemeanor charges.
Oh boy.
And they exonerate him on the felony. Here's the thing. The level of proof for each charge was exactly the same. So
how do you come up with misdemeanor?
You can't. And what it was is they got in that room, and what it is the woman had she had claimed domestic abuse against this guy before, but then when they wanted to charge him, she said she wouldn't testify against him. It was one of those things.
Right.
Because of that one incident, they decided to cut the baby in half. We'll charge him with the misdemeanor, but we won't charge him with the felony. And guess what that did? The felonies would have meant he would have spent 10 years in prison.
Right.
The misdemeanors were time served. He had already been in the county jail for 90 days.
Oh my gosh. Hey, Naughty Oddie. See, I would absolutely volunteer to be a professional juror. I would go to school to do it. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And here's why. If you spend, and I know you spend time covering true crime, and I cover true crime, but I also watch other people's coverage of true crime. And we can just take this case, for example. We have all seen if you spend any time at all researching this case, everybody has seen the same evidence. There is, again, I can't reiterate this enough for anybody listening now and anybody in the future. There's no secret other vault of evidence. It's all there on Callahan's, except for the autopsy photos, but y'all don't need to see that. Bottom line is, Naughty Oddie, if you type ! memberships, it'll come. I don't know if it'll do it from StreamYard, but if you type it that way, it'll do it. Or Team Psych Word, can you do it for her, please? Anyway, thank you, Team Psych Word. Okay, so when you hear people argue this case, either whether they believe they're guilty or they believe they're innocent, the weight that different people put to different parts of the evidence, right? I don't think that I don't care if Damien read every single book ever written by Aleister Crowley and wrote him postcards. And, I don't care about that.
Aleister Crowley worked for the British government.
It's not like a factor for me. What's a factor?
Yeah, he was a nasty, horrible guy, but I mean, come on.
Right, exactly. Like, look, that's not a factor for me. But for some people, the fact that he wrote Brent Davis is one of those people, wrote the name Aleister Crowley in that alphabet and Jason's name and his son's name, why the defense on redirect didn't come back and counter with, Damien, when did you and Dominique decide on the name for your child? Because it doesn't, there's other factors. I would have asked that. Like, just because they say he wrote it while he was in jail, right? Well, the proof of him writing it in jail is not that his son's name was there, because I knew I had names picked out for my kids before they were born, right? Yeah. So that's not, I would have asked that as a defense attorney. But my point is the weight of different aspects of the case that people give, whereas I'm dismissive of Aleister Crowley. I don't give a rat's fat kneecap about him or how much Damien, I don't care what alphabet he wrote it in. That has no, it doesn't matter to me, because there's no satanic element to this crime at all.
Yeah, and Aleister Crowley never killed 3 little 8-year-old boys.
He didn't. And
tie them and throw them in a ditch. So
exactly. And Damien did make a good point when asked about Aleister Crowley, that he also thought he was a god. So there you go. I actually think that in some of his writings, the sacrifice he's talking about with respect to children is actually about a different act,
Hmm.
self gratification act. It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with actual children, but
And he
like
was very
anything.
well known for,
Yes.
being and doing all those crazy things in that arena.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
him and
I,
L. Ron Hubbard spent quite a bit of time together.
yeah, I mean, and the thing, like with Damien, I never knew this was a thing until a couple of months ago, that people they like obsess about Exhibit 500, and I'm just like,
Mm,
so I went back and looked at it. I'm like, I remember reading it, and I'm like, yeah, I'm reading through it, and I'm like, yeah, he's a troubled dude. I told
yeah,
him when I interviewed him the first time, I said, you were clearly a troubled teen, and he said I was. And but the things that he said in there, I've heard a lot of that stuff from people my age when we were teenagers, and I mean, some of that stuff was just stupid. I was like, really, you're looking at this and thinking that this is some kind of a crime, or like when
I
Jason
never
Baldwin,
understood either.
I will never forget when I was at one of the Rule 37 hearings, and the prosecutors wanted to talk about Jason's criminal history. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be good. Because at this point, I didn't know much about the case, really. And so I'm like, well, he must have this horrifying, rap sheet.
Hmm.
And he gets up there and he talks about him like throwing rocks at a car in a field and getting caught by a cop, this old abandoned car. And then he like
Yes.
stole, I think it was like a bag of M&Ms from a Walmart or something. I'm like,
It was Walgreens, M&Ms, and chips. Hmm.
and I was like, oh, so he jumped from that to heinous murder. I mean, come on.
Right, exactly. This is the thing. I was listening. Thank you, Bloom Tick Bloom, again for another suggestion, and I mean that in the most sarcastic way. And I think everybody who's ever listened will understand why. It's exclamation point memberships with the S at the end of it, guys. I can't do it from StreamYard. Uh, I was listening to Gary Meese give an overview, and he says that Jason Baldwin had a history of violence. And I would like to know where that history of violence is, because that is patently untrue. And he's not only did he say he has a history of violence, he said all three of them do. And that particularly against children, and that is patently false. There is no at any you cannot equate Damien and Shane and what happened between him and Shane Divelbliss as anywhere in the same realm as murdering 8-year-olds. First of all, this is a peer. Shane could defend himself against Damien Eccles. They were the
Yeah.
same age and roughly the same size. I think actually Shane was bigger than Damien, but and I think more in shape. But I digress. That's not even the point. The point is that a peer is not the same. Thank you, Naughty Audie. Welcome to members. I can't see which one it is on StreamYard, but welcome to membership. Thank you. It's not the same thing. Him threatening to scratch out or even trying to a romantic rival's eyes is not the same as murdering 8-year-old boys. It's not the same, and it doesn't. It and him John Douglas. I just rewatched the both seasons of Mindhunter
Hmm.
over the weekend, which they need to make a third season. I don't understand why they won't, but whatever. So then they don't ask me these things. Um,
He
but
wished me a happy birthday the other day.
did he?
It
I
wasn't
would
even my
love.
birthday.
I would absolutely love to pick John Douglas's brain, but then I'm afraid that he would start profiling me, and who knows what he would come up with because he's that good. Like I'd have to believe what he
Yeah.
said about me, and I don't really want anybody investigating me like that.
Well, if
But
you said it, John Douglas, it must be true.
it must be. But I didn't realize how much that he was part of instrumental in the show and the episodes, and that it's loose. I mean, it's based on the behavioral science unit, right? So now I totally forgot because I got distracted by chat what my whole point to that was. I totally forgot what we were even. Oh, John Douglas would not equate the same two. He would not say that if he were looking into Damien Eccles' past, that him trying to fight Shane Divelbliss would be a precursor to what was to come, because it's ridiculous to equate the two. but people,
I mean, I got in fights I punched people in the face when I was a kid. I mean, that was a thing back in our time, you know. I mean, you
correct.
fought people. I
You
mean,
fought. You had a fight after school, and then it was over and done with.
yeah, I mean, this is just so stupid. I mean, this is the problem I have. I don't have a problem if you come up with some evidence, like something that can be used in a courtroom that
Right.
says you specifically committed a crime.
Correct.
I would consider that all day long. But think about this, and this is the thing that really gets me about this case now. And again, I don't definitively know that they didn't commit the crime. I could never say
Correct.
that as a journalist. But
As
even
a
I was,
human, nobody could unless you were there.
unless you were there, the only person who knows the truth are the people is the person who did it, and then anybody who might have been connected to it.
Correct.
And so, like, you know, um,
Hey,
oh,
Heather, whatever.
and I was trying, like, so if you all we're doing, like you said before, is we're analyzing our from our perspective the different elements of the case.
Correct.
And the thing that blows my mind when I'm reading some of these pages is that these people, they key in on his personality, and then and they try to come up with ways, like he is seeking DNA testing on those ligatures. They try to frame that in a way that he's trying to manipulate the court system so they won't test him, or that he just wants those tested because he knows he didn't touch those ligatures. And I'm like, how insane do you have to be to believe something like that?
That
I
is
can
the
tell
most
you,
ridiculous argument I've ever one of. It has to is
yeah.
up there in the top 10 at least.
And then I see all these legal experts. Oh, well, Patrick Banka, fashioned this argument so that it would definitely be rejected by the judge. I can tell you right now, I talked to Patrick Banka the night before the hearing. And you know what he told me?
What?
He had hope. He said, I think we're going to get this tested tomorrow. Because here's the thing. Why would anybody not want anything? The thing about it is they keep saying, well, he only wants these 3 ligatures or 6 ligatures or whatever tested. Well, who cares? Test them.
Right. But why would he listen? Here's the thing. The case for Damien, really, other than the fact that we're arguing, he's maintaining an Alfred plea means you're legally guilty, right? But Damien is maintaining that he is factually innocent, right?
Yep.
But if he were legally and factually guilty, right? And he got out of prison on a loophole. Why would he argue anything in the first place? First of all, he's not raking in the money he was. Okay. He doesn't have I suppose if he reached out, he could, but right at this moment in time, he doesn't have the Johnny Depps, the Peter Jacksons, the Natalie Maines, the Dixie Chicks. He doesn't have the big supporters with millions to donate, right? Or even tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands to donate. At this point he did, and he probably could again, but right now he doesn't. So it's the testing, the expense of the testing is solely on him. So why would he do anything? He's out.
And Jen, it's even more than that, because it's not just the expense. That is a component of it. There's also the other component. If it's kind of like this, if the request is relatively small and it's not going to be so cumbersome and so hard for like the state to put it together, if you ask to test everything,
right,
that would take a lot of effort and a lot of time, and it would eat up state resources, even if you were going to pay for the actual testing.
Right.
But and like I told you, I know Jared Bradley from MVAC. He's the CEO of the company. And I said, I interviewed him. I said, Jared, why would is there some reason why you would want the shoelaces? And he goes, oh yeah. He goes, those would be the perfect place to find evidence because of the way that shoelaces, your shoelaces are coarse. And here's the other thing. How many people have touched your shoelaces?
Not many.
Not many. In
maybe
fact,
2.
Maybe
me and
2.
my daughter share shoes, so if there was DNA, it's going to be me and her.
That would be it.
Potentially the cat, because the cat has chewed my shoelaces before. So
okay, so that's it.
Though that's it.
Right. People
and also,
don't.
Does anybody really believe that Damien is the one that came up with what to be tested? No, of course not. They went to MVAC and said, "This is what we got. What out of all of this stuff do you think is most likely to produce the best results? And that's where the shoelaces come in. From
Yeah.
MVAC, not from Damien Eccles. I can guarantee you he is not sitting in his office somewhere thinking about, what's the best thing to test? No, of course not. They relied on the experts. Hello.
And why would he do anything?
Exactly.
Did you know Damien Eccles might be has one unique distinction in all of American history. He is the only person in the history of the United States who stands convicted of the crime that sent him to death row, and he's walking the streets free.
Oh, well, yeah, because Michael Peterson was convicted and got out on an Alford plea too, but he was not on death row.
Right.
But yeah,
I can't find any other case where somebody is on death row. They're convicted of a crime. They're on death row. And then now some of them have their sentences commuted or other things like that. But he was a death row inmate one day, and the next day he was walking the streets a free man, still convicted of that crime.
Correct.
And here's the other thing. So
children at that.
And I heard this argument that the state of Arkansas, that somehow the defense did some DNA testing in 2011. It didn't turn out the way they wanted it to. They hid the results, and then they agreed to the state agreed to the Alford plea. That's not what happened.
That's a lie. I know, because
I
read the filings.
Right. And here's the thing.
What happened, Jared, because I need an independent source to verify.
So what happened is you had a dynamic in the state of Arkansas where the attorney general at the time was a guy named Dustin McDaniel. Scott Ellington was the prosecutor, and you had a new judge appointed to the case, Judge David Laser. There was no question that Judge David Laser, after the Arkansas Supreme Court threw it back to the circuit court and said, have an evidentiary hearing. It was very well-known knowledge at that time, that summer of 2011, early in the summer, that Judge David Laser was likely to order a new trial because the evidence was mounting. The evidence that they didn't do it was mounting.
Right, the exculpatory.
Right. So the state had a conundrum on their hands because they were gonna get a new trial. And Scott Ellington told me, and I've got the email like I told you guys earlier. He said we could never bring charges if this were to come about again. We couldn't do it because of stale evidence and witnesses changing their statements. Okay. So they knew they had a problem, that these guys were going to get a new trial. They're going to get out. So you'll never guess who went to law school together.
Tell me.
Patrick Benka and Dustin McDaniel, who was the attorney general of the state of Arkansas at the time. They went to law school together. So they go and eat lunch. And this was a few weeks before the whole thing went down. And they start discussing. Now, to be honest, Benka brought it up. He brought it up to Dustin. He says, hey, maybe there's a way to get these guys out of jail early because it's going to happen.
But it could have been years because of new trial.
It could have been 2 years. It would have been another 2 years in prison. And so they come up with a deal. They call Scott, and Scott listens to it. Well, Damien and Jesse immediately signed off and said, we'll do it.
Yeah.
Jason would not, and I knew he was holding out. I knew he was a holdout. I heard a rumor that one of the three had held out, and I knew it was Jason because Jason had told me previously, he says, I will walk out of here a free man. And and so that's how this whole deal went down. Now, this is the thing. If the state of Arkansas truly believed that Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin and Jesse Misskelley Jr. were these horrifying, child murderers.
Right.
Why would they not fight it to the very bitter end?
I bet that's what I've been saying. That is what I've been saying.
If your case is so good, as a lot of these, I guess, nons, yeah, as they believe, if it's so good, why did the state acquiesce? They did not have to do the deal, and they did it anyway because they knew where this was headed. And I guess what they never anticipated was that science at some point would get good enough to prove that this case was so erroneous in its components.
Right.
Again, there may be evidence that they just, we always have to be fair. Is it possible they missed evidence out there? It is possible. But what are the possibilities? And this is one thing that I guess some of these people don't like to address. the fact that their DNA, okay, Terry's hair is out there, probably.
Right.
Okay,
right.
that can be explained. David
Right.
Jacoby's
It's
hair is
not
out
that
there.
compelling
Right.
by itself.
By itself, it's not. It's
It's
here's the thing.
compelling, but it's not enough for a conviction
Yeah.
or even to be
20 years ago, it would have been very compelling.
Right.
But we live in a different time now where we realize, hey, this secondary hair transfer is a thing.
Right.
So, so it's the fact that their DNA is not out there and it has been tested. I have actually spoken at colleges before, and I said, hey, just so we understand the statistical probability of this, it is more likely that anybody in this room, and I'm talking, there might be 1,000 people in there, anybody in this room might have done this. It's more statistically probable than these 3 guys because they have been utterly excused as donors of any of the stuff they've tested.
Correct.
And that's a fact.
It is a fact. And and it's always an argument of semantics. I've been quoted, not quoted, but argued back as having said, there is no evidence. No. That's not what I said. What I said was there is evidence. There is no evidence that links the West Memphis 3 to this crime. That's very different than there being no evidence. There is still an entire complete male DNA sequence that was found on Christopher Byers where the shoelaces go. I think it's called an eyelet. It's called a shoe hole. The other thing is, just because you and I, John Q. Public, have not seen the lab results from Bodie from the 2011 test, it does not mean that they don't exist, and it does not mean that the state and the court has not seen those results. There were status update hearings. Okay.
Yeah. Jen, that is one of the bogus, most crap things I hear is they say that somehow Eccles and his team are hiding these results. That's not how this works.
That's not.
It's
not.
The state is in custody of that evidence.
Correct.
All they have to do is they can issue a warrant for those results. Correct. And they can get them. Correct. And my suspicion is that when the testing was done, it was inconclusive. Like they didn't really find anything of value from the defense, like Damien Eccles' his team. They didn't find anything that they didn't already have.
Right.
And from the prosecution's perspective, unless the defense is going to say, hey, well, we found something, they're not going to react to it, because one thing that they found, that by putting more things into the case file and putting more things into public documentation, was that it's causing them more problems with, civilian sleuths out there, which I think is really funny to me, is that there are some people out there. This is why I love crowdsourcing. Like I work on a couple of other murder cases.
Oh, okay.
And I've got some Facebook pages. I think I told you about that when we lured that one murderer guy onto a page, and we're trying to lure another one right now. I hope he's not watching.
I doubt it.
But these people, they sit at home and they're good at genealogy. Some of them are psychiatrists. They're good. They have like all this wealth of like experience in different arenas.
Yes.
And then they get obsessed with a case. In this case might be the dawn of that whole phenomenon, because so many people got access to the information. Like Keith Cressman, I call his office, I leave messages. I'm like, I sat with you, and he won't call me back for anything. And it's because they don't want a record of anything now.
No, they don't. I will say this is, if you are a first time into true crime and you really want to deep dive a case, this is a case to do it. And the reason why, not only is it an interesting case, you'll learn a lot from it, but unlike other cases, every single thing aside from the autopsy pictures, again, is online for free. Every filing, every interview, every police report, handwritten at that. Some of these West Memphis Police Department, except for you, Mike Allen. Mike Allen has the best handwriting on the from the 1993 West Memphis Police Department force. He had the best handwriting.
Yeah, and I'll say this about Mike Allen too, and he believes they're guilty, but he is a very nice guy. Like if you ever meet him, he's a nice guy. I haven't talked to him in a really long time, but he, and I'll say this: I have friends in law enforcement who have worked in various capacities in relation to this case, and some of them think they did it. And I just respectfully disagree with them, and that's just where we're at.
Exactly. And sometimes it has to be that way. Like there are cases that I've talked about where people, well, the people that I talk with that are subscribed to my channel and that I just know from YouTube, we fundamentally agree on 9 out of the 10 cases. This is the 10th case that we fundamentally disagree on. And that's okay. I'm fine to agree to disagree, but what I can't abide, sound like the dude, is that to be told that I just don't like law enforcement or that I'm a Damien Eccles fan. Nothing could be further from the truth. First of all, I respect law enforcement. And second of all, anybody that's listened to my show for any length of time knows that I will concede that Damien Eccles I'm not a fan of his, and I'm not a fan of the things that he's done even since he's gotten out. It's always bothered me that he's not tried to have a relationship with his son. I understand that he was robbed of almost 20 years with his son, but what's been going on these last few years? You know what I'm saying? I have a problem with that. I have a problem with people just assuming that they know what they would do if they had been in prison since they were 16, 17, and 18 years old. Death row is not a fun place to be at all.
No, I can tell you it's not. I've been there many times. And
prison in general is not a fun place to be. And it's especially not a fun place to be if you're 16 years old and you're convicted of killing a child. Just think about that. You're in Gen Pop, okay? Period. I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully that didn't happen, but you know what I'm saying? It's not fun.
I can tell you that the things that they talk about in prison, they absolutely do happen.
I hope it didn't happen to Jason and Jesse. I hope that they didn't have the kind of time that.
Yeah, I mean, Jason and I have talked about that some, and basically it started because I did a story about how Damien Eccles he claimed he was being raped by his prison guards.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was the person in the next cell too.
Yeah, no, there was a story about that, but it was also, he told me in an interview.
Notice, I never knew that.
Oh, wow. Yeah. No, I wrote about it, and it hit the fan for a while over that. And, but yeah, no, those stories are all true.
But it's terrible. And so you tell me what you would do then, right? You have, and Jason,
there's no question what anybody would do.
Jason held out, bless his heart. He held out. And I know he was pressured. And I know that him signing that Alford plea was the last thing that he wanted to do. Of all 3 of them, I will never forget when Jason stands up after being convicted and Judge Burnett asks them, but he asked all 3 of them, but this Jason stands out for a specific reason, because he asks Jason, is there any legal reason why sentence shouldn't be opposed at this time? And Jason says, because I'm innocent. And Judge Burnett asked him to repeat it because he didn't hear him. And he said, because I'm innocent. And I remember when he took the Alford plea, there is a tone to Jason's voice when he says it. I understand that it is in the state's best interest and mine for me to take the Alford plea. He didn't want to do it, and he was pressured. And he got the shaft.
And Jen, here was the part about the dynamics of the Attorney General and Scott Ellington and all this other stuff that was going on.
Mm-hmm.
The Attorney General was getting ready to run for governor.
Oh.
And Scott Ellington was getting ready to run for Congress.
Bigger aspirations.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one thing that all those supporters did is they were really good at raising money for certain people's opponents. Like John Fogelman lost his race to get on the Arkansas Supreme Court because the supporters raised so much money for his opponent.
Well, sometimes it has to be like that.
Right.
They underestimate. Listen, the supporter movement, you want to know how it started? It really started as a grassroots movement. It started by people having bake sales and sending money. I mean, it really did. There were regular folks like me and you and other people who were raising money for the West Memphis 3 before the Henry Rollins, before the Eddie Vedders, before the Johnny Depps. Not that we're not grateful, but
I actually did a feature story one time. Obviously, it wasn't with you, but I did. They had groups, little groups that had formed around the country to support them in the beginning. Mm-hmm. And I guess you guys probably were connected. The internet was in its infancy. But I did.
Yeah, we used to talk on the old easy boards.
Yeah, and there was a
forums.
group from California that had been involved in the case, from the beginning, and they were just, they were believers and I guess supporters is the way you'd say it. And I
Hmm.
did a couple feature stories on them because I thought it was so interesting. I mean, covering those hearings was interesting for me because of the people who would come, because they would come from all over the country. They would spend all their money. There was an attorney and his girlfriend from Philadelphia who came on their vacation to Jonesboro, Arkansas to spend a week listening to forensic scientists testify in court.
Yes, the people that started westmemphis3.org, Kathy Grove and Burke,
Yeah,
they're the ones that started putting the documents online.
yeah.
There was Greg, I can't think of his last name and I don't want to dox him, but he is the one that would be their liaison at the West Memphis Police Department, helping them get the documents. The Callahan's was built by supporters and nons together, just wanting all of the documents out. I wanted to do a thing covering Damien's trial testimony, but I can't find I know that the audio exists, and the only reason I know that is because the transcription exists. And I remember when we got the audio from the trials, and Callahan's couldn't support the bandwidth of the people of hosting the audio back in those days. So what happened is people were given um, parts of testimony to transcribe. And I will never forget having to transcribe Detective Brian Ridge's testimony,
Hmm.
because it's like 5 words of testimony followed by 10 minutes of unwrapping brown paper sacks. It's very loud. It's just tedious. That is how all of this all started. And I wanted to have, I probably have to just ask the clerk for it, because I've reached
Hmm.
out to the people that I know that might have the audio, because I want people to hear because it's played in Paradise Lost, but it's not played in the order in which it was given.
Yeah.
And that's important. And so I wanted to do that, but I'll figure out a different way. But that's people don't understand really how this case got to where it is. People did not. This is a misconception, Gary Gitchell. I hope you're listening to me, because I heard you. I heard your deposition testimony in the Maines case, and you're factually incorrect, sir. People didn't support the West Memphis Three because of Johnny Depp, or because of, I'm sure there's a small element to that know about the case from them. But the truth of the matter is, the core supporters, the people that have been doing this for decades, that's not who made us decide that. We were not influenced by Hollywood. It's insulting for you to say that, sir. I just want you to know
Yeah,
that.
I mean, who isn't? I mean, okay, I guess there was a phenomenon like with reality TV in recent years
Yeah,
where people, they get starstruck. Like people ask me all the time, they're like, "So you don't when you're around these people, they don't?" And I'm like, I don't even care. I mean, they are nothing. They're just another person to me, and I don't get that phenomenon.
I
Like,
don't either. I'm not starstruck by Damien, Jason, or Jesse. Jason is interesting to me because he's so quiet and not a lot is known about him. And I don't actually care. I don't want to know about May 5th or any of that stuff. Jason is just interesting to me because I think he found a loophole in order to help people in his situation, because felons are not allowed to associate with other felons. And the fact of the matter is that he's at the time. I mean, he still is,
mhm.
but I think he's not on parole or
Yeah,
supervised, whatever.
they have the provisions on their case are very weird because they were able to travel and pretty much do whatever they wanted to do from the jump.
Together, like they were
Yeah,
allowed to. That was because it was a stipulation that was asked for. Because I read
yeah.
the Alford plea, and they had
And
to add a
again, you're the
stipulation for them
state.
to be together.
You're saying these guys killed these three kids, and you're letting them hang out together again. I mean,
Correct,
oh my
especially for
god.
interviews. But then here comes Jason and he says, "Okay, I'm not allowed to actually associate with other felons. However, I know what it is to be where these men are." And he working with Proclaim Justice. And that to me speaks volumes about his character, is that he's not sitting around being bitter and worrying about suing the state of Arkansas. Not he's trying to help himself, but more importantly, he's trying to pay it forward and help others because he was helped. And that
You
is
know,
what
he
is
was in the court.
interesting.
You know, who he was in court with the other day when that hearing happened. He was with Mara Laverett.
He, they are buddies to the end.
Hmm.
They really are. And I will say this. I'm I cannot hide my disappointment in Damien's defense team not reaching out to Jason Baldwin and asking him to be a part of this motion for DNA testing. And I will say this, my listeners know, but I'll tell you, I was shocked when I follow Jason on Twitter, and I was getting his notifications for the tweets that he was doing the night before the trial or the hearing. And I was always under the assumption that the reason Jason wasn't part of it is not because he wasn't asked, but because maybe he didn't have the resources, the funding. He didn't have an attorney. And when he started tweeting, and I found out that he just simply wasn't asked to be a part of it, but he showed up anyway. Again, that speaks to his character. And I find him to be an interesting person aside from the West Memphis 3 aspect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I was at the Peabody Hotel, and a guy that's associated with Jason Baldwin walked by and said hi and came over and shook my hand because we'd never met in person before. I'd talked to him a few times. And I said, is Jason coming tomorrow? Will he be here? And he goes, yeah. He says he will be here tomorrow. And I was like, and I was kind of, shocked because I didn't know. And I'll be honest with you, I talked to Jason the next day. And obviously I actually walked up to the court, walked with Damien Eccles. I was with him walking up to the courthouse, and we were chatting the whole time. And I never asked him because, I don't know what the rationale for it would be. There's somebody I probably could ask who would probably give me the backstory, but I haven't delved into it yet because it could be something personal, and I don't,
Look, I know that there is, okay, it's not a secret. It's been floating around for years. There's bad blood between Damien and Jason. And there's the part of it that's unknown is the actual source. I suspect it's a combination of multiple things. I know that that Damien was not pleased the way that he was portrayed in Devil's Knot in the movie. And Jason worked on it, and he was not pleased about that. There's other rumors that Jason was not pleased with the amount of money that Damien received, like as far as like commissary and stuff. Like that was a problem. It was an issue. There was an issue with Jesse. Same thing, and that's another thing that I remember distinctly. Ed what's his last name? Oppenheimer? No.
Oh, Opperman. Ed Opperman.
Asking you about, which was this true romance person. I can attest, and there is digital evidence of me being around at the time that this all occurred. She came along as a supporter long after I did, like a year or two after I did, maybe less. Okay, here's the deal. She started out as a supporter. All right. She started out by writing to, I think she wrote to all three of them. Jesse is the only one that answered. They had a pen pal friendship for a very short amount of time. Then she got on the visitors list and she went to see him. Okay. And then once she came to see him, she came back to the easy boards. And the first thing she said was, Jesse doesn't get the money in his commissary account that Jason and Damien get to. And it's all going through the westmemphis3.org. And they're the ones that are divvying it up. And why is, Jesse's getting the shaft. That's how it started. And when she was not well received by supporters because of that, and people gave pushback because they said, well, how do you know? Because Jesse says, commissary is like the most important, one of the most important things in prison. Okay. And it is what it is. Jesse could have just been asking her for money or wanting money. And I don't know how it was divvied up. I don't have access to the books, and neither did she. And it was the way in which she did it. It was very accusatory, but in a way as if it was a fact. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. That's how it started. And it wasn't long after that. I think she visited Jesse one more time, and it came out, all of a sudden now, because of something that she asked him at a visit, now he's guilty. Something he said to her. But she won't say what it was or anything like that. There are no details. It's all very sketch balls, in my opinion. And that's the facts surrounding it. So if we're going to put true romance out there, let's put her out there. Let's say it how it was, not just the things that are important to your argument, Opperman.
I agree. You know, it's been a long time since I talked to Ed.
Yeah, it's been like 4 years, but I listened to it like 3 days ago, so it's fresh in my brain.
Yeah, I was trying to think of all the things him and I talked about because I actually did 2 hours with him. I had no idea going into the interview that he was so fervent that these three guys did it. I don't stay in that world. I don't
Yeah.
listen to a ton of true crime podcasts or anything because when you live something so much like this that I do, where it's real life a lot of the time, it's not. I try to spend my spare time working on, doing other things. But we were going on it, and him and I were going back and forth pretty good. And then I was supposed to do it for an hour, and his producer, whoever it was, came on when they went to a commercial break. He goes, "Hey man, could you go for another hour? This is really good." And I was like, "I guess." And then so we started talking about a different case, but I don't.
He's very fervent. So is Gary Meese. And the thing is that their arguments for guilt, in my opinion, are less evidence based and frankly more emotion based. And I just don't have patience for that. I'm not even going to lie. I don't have patience for it. I will, like when he was asking you about, oh my gosh, the kid that Jesse gave his shoes to, and allegedly confessed to. Why is his name on the tip of my tongue? And we just talked about this too.
Yeah, we did.
But you guys, it'll come to me in a minute. Okay. Here's the deal. He turned the shoe. I don't care what the kid said. The shoes were turned over. Both Buddy Lucas. Thank you, Daphne. Buddy Lucas.
Yeah, Buddy Lucas.
The shoes were turned over. Guess what? The Adidas and the Converse, neither one of them matched the mold. So what difference does it make what Buddy Lucas said? I don't care what he says Jesse told him. The evidence doesn't match. And this brouhaha over Jesse crying because Lee Rush, Jesse Miss Kelly Sr.'s girlfriend at the time, said that he was crying as evidence of guilt. Okay. The rumor was, or the story always was, that it was because Stephanie Brewer's family was his girlfriend at the time moving to Florida, right?
Yes.
Now, okay, maybe her family didn't end up moving to Florida. Maybe it was something that her family was talking about that she relayed to Jesse, and he was upset about that because his stepmother, who was, I can't think of her name right now, that raised him, talked about Jesse's abandonment issues. So is it so difficult to believe that it's possible that teenagers hyped up a potential situation and Jesse got in his feels about it? That to me seems a lot more possible than he was crying because he murdered 3 8-year-old boys, because people that murder 3 8-year-old boys don't typically have remorse and cry.
Yeah, and
it takes a different kind of person to do something like that.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and when you're talking about Gary Meese, like somebody gave me his books, and they are truly awful. I mean, they are factually incorrect. They're grammatically incorrect. I mean, some of the sentences don't even have periods, and I'm sitting there going,
"What?
This guy used to be a journalist." I've got 2 of them. Somebody gave them to me, and I was reading them a couple of years ago.
I can't read him because I couldn't even make it through the interview where he's coughing in the mic.
No, and I took a highlighter and I was just highlighting.
Possibility, Davi. Not to interrupt you, but I want to acknowledge this. That's a good possibility. It could be a strategy.
It could be. I doubt it.
I doubt it. Something else is up.
No, Jason was too shocked or too surprised by what was happening.
Exactly.
Yeah, he made the public statement. Nobody had contacted me or my attorneys or whatever. But with Gary Meese, I don't understand why anybody would consider him an expert on this case. He never covered any of it. I mean, he is a journalist by trade, or was.
Yes.
And if this is the kind of journalist he was, it's shocking. Some of the stuff that he says, or some of the stuff that he writes about. He never interviewed. Like, I'm a journalist, so my idea, I'm not going to have an opinion until I go and talk to the person.
Right.
Start there, and then you add it, you layer it in.
Right.
Because, you can't rely on firsthand accounts of people, but you have to have them. That's part of the profession.
Right.
But he never interviewed anybody. He's as novice at this as any person on the street. But
When
for
you want
some
to
reason,
interview the source, i.e., Damien, Jason, and Jesse, before you make an opinion as to what kind of people they
yes,
are, I can't tell you what kind of people they are. I'm interested in learning about what kind of person Jason is based on what I've read, right?
yeah.
Not
And here's the
making
thing: you can go into an interview from a perspective of it going to be adversarial. Like you can tell
right,
somebody, like, and I've done those interviews, and I've been interviewed like doing Ed Opperman. Immediately I knew this was turning into an adversarial conversation, so I was like, okay, this is adversarial, and he could have told me beforehand it was going to be adversarial, and I would have said, okay, let's do it. I don't have a problem with that. I
right.
mean,
Sometimes it's like that. Not everybody agrees, but the way that I have to give it up to you because had I been interviewed by Ed, I think you did well. I'm not even gonna try to pretend. I would have tried my very level best to keep it as professional as I could, but there are points that he makes and has continued to make and has made forever that I find exasperating, and I would find it very difficult to hide my exasperation after a certain point. I'm not even gonna try to pretend. Probably why I'm not a journalist and why I'm on YouTube. That kind of
well,
thing is celebrated here.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. Like,
You did great though. I would have
well,
lost
thank
I
you. I
think I would have
appreciate
lost
that.
my cool with the whole yeah, I would have lost it.
I mean, the thing about it is, like, I've sat in jail cells and interviewed people before, and like that family of four, that whole heinous murder where this mom, dad, little boy. It started with a knock at the door. It was a rainy summer night. Friend needed help with his car that was down by the river about a mile or so away from their house. Within an hour, mom, dad, and little boy are slaughtered like animals, and I don't
Oh
mean that
god.
I mean that
You mean
literally,
literally.
not facetiously. And
Right.
the little girl was taken,
Oh god.
and she was kept in a barrel out in a garage, duct taped up, and she was only brought out to do the most heinous,
Yeah.
diabolical things you can think of.
Oh.
And so I had to interview those guys, the guys that were, and I have a little bit different theory on the case. And I know the prosecutor in that case very well, or former prosecutor, and he's a friend of mine. And him and I've ate lunch before, and I've told him what I thought about it.
Right.
But you can never, you have to be able to sit with that person and be calm, have your
Right.
thoughts collected. Because if I just sat there and dwelled on the fact that that little girl was in that barrel and this dude sitting right in front of me,
Right.
it probably kept her out there, and you know what he did to her.
Right. Exactly.
And you couldn't keep it together. But how are we ever supposed to learn? Like, the best way, the behavioral analysis unit of the FBI, one of the breakthroughs they got was getting to interview Ted Bundy.
Yeah, and Ed Kemper. He fascinates
Yes,
me. Ed Kemper fascinates
yes,
me more
and
than
so
Bundy.
yeah, and that's the thing. So, like, the best thing is just for him to talk. I will I will memorialize the conversation, which I did through stories, and I wrote about it in a book.
Right.
And then we have it into perpetuity. And maybe 20 years from now, the next John Douglas will look at that interview and go, aha,
Right.
you
Learn
know?
something from it. You have
Yeah.
yeah. It has to be a learning yeah. I mean, I think if I went into talking with somebody like Ed Opperman in that way, okay, this is going to be I'm going to learn something from this, then I could keep my cool for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, it's funny. I don't know if you listened. I don't know if he divided those interviews up or they just kept it in one long interview. But the second hour of that, when I talk about that particular case,
yes,
I don't think Ed spoke 10 words.
he did. No, he didn't. He was quiet the whole time, and I kept.
Yeah.
But I remember when he would ask you about stuff. I don't think that he understood that you're coming the way that you're a journalist, and so while you have an opinion, and you you've done because you've done it here. You've given your opinion on things, but you've kept it as professional like a journalist. It'd be different if he were to interview somebody like me, right? I don't do this. I'm not a journalist. I have a YouTube channel and I've studied this case for 20 years. So if he were somebody like me to argue, like if he were to ask me about Buddy Lucas, I would have a different response to him than you as a journalist do. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You know,
Because
my,
and that's how that's who he was interviewing, not George Jared, the person, George Jared, the journalist, and the author who wrote a book. And I think if he would have done it that way, I thought you did great. I didn't think he did so good though. I'm not gonna play. I'm not a fan of him though, so maybe
I talked to Ed. I actually emailed him a couple months ago because I'm involved with a national group called the Case Breakers. And we're the group that claimed that we had solved the Zodiac case.
Oh, okay.
And I was asked to be a part of that group. It's a bunch of professionals from around the country, law professors, people who worked in the CIA, worked in law enforcement. The group was, I don't know.
One of my very good friends was trying to break that cipher forever. She's
Yeah.
Still,
Well, we think we've done it, and there's a lot of information. Some of it's been released, like my investigative partner, Jennifer, that I've talked about a lot.
Oh, you have a Jennifer too. We'll see.
I do.
People.
Yeah, I do. She's
us Jens are good people. Most of us. Some of us are. Oof.
She is one of the most talented people I've ever come across in this space.
Awesome.
But anyway, so I was trying to remember where I was going with that. Oh, so one thing that
thank you, Shmita. Shmita dropped your link to the Case Breakers website.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
She's excellent like that, my Shmita.
Well, the guy who founded Case Breakers is a guy named Tom Colbert. He's all the DB Cooper like docs that you've seen and all the information. He did that. Like, did you see?
It's on my neck. It's on my next thing to watch. Netflix just released something, and it's on my my thing to watch. Yeah,
that very thing. Tom called me. He lives in California. He's like, man, he goes, we've got this doc on DB Cooper coming out. He goes, do you think you could rustle a lot of podcasters? And so I messaged Ed. I said, hey man, I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse, but if you could have him on, and I actually don't even know if he went on with him, but me and Ed conversed a little bit there. But I don't mind somebody.
A huge podcaster. Throw him my name. I'll interview him. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I'll put you on my list now, and next time it comes up, yeah.
These cases fascinate me, and the people that, actually go and interview them, and because that's what fascinates me about true crime is all of us as human beings, physically, the majority of us are physically capable of taking a life, right? But we all have that thing inside of us, that conscience that won't allow us to cross that line. And I'm fascinated by the people that do cross that line. Then I get fascinated by the CSI part of it. Then I'm fascinated by the trial part of it, because I do believe in our justice system. It's not a perfect system, but it is the only one that we have. And I think that jurors need to take their jobs responsibly. And I agree with you, to have a professional juror system would be a much better system, because you're right. I mean, we are just, when you're called for jury duty, you're just a regular average citizen, right? And you don't, the weight that you would put on evidence, just through no fault of your own, just because you're not familiar, but you've got somebody's life in your hands, and it's, I think people take their job. I think people take their job as a juror seriously. I absolutely do. But I think that it's not one of those things that you can just walk in and sit down and do. I don't think. Now, you know what I mean?
You cannot do that. Yeah. That is absolutely correct, because I can tell you right now, I've covered every kind of court, civil court. I covered a case one time where this golf course was up against this airport, and the airport was trying to get rid of the golf course, and all this stuff was going on. I've covered everything you can imagine in a courtroom, including every crime you can imagine, from mob hits to bank robberies to everything. And I can tell you right now, the person who first stepped into a courtroom would have been a horrible juror. I would have been a horrible juror. I would have made the same mistakes that people made in this case and other cases. And it was through the course of time that I became more, it just experience, you see more. And then, because like you said earlier, you said there's that the problem in this case for supporters and nons, a lot of times, because we're dealing with the same fact set in a sense, but because of the way they weight evidence or things that they perceive to be evidence, like for instance, in a case, if you have 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 a case, Exhibit 500.
Lord
I look at
Jesus.
that. Yeah, I look at that and I'm like, this does not directly correlate to him killing those 3 kids.
It does not. No. In fact,
It doesn't.
also, I think they don't understand what Exhibit 500 is.
No.
Exhibit 500 was mitigating factors why Damien shouldn't be put to death. That's
Yes,
what
it
they were
wasn't introduced
using.
it was not
No,
introduced at trial. It was
no.
introduced in the sentencing phase, which you're very familiar with,
Yes.
is that's when the mitigating factors come in. And
That's what,
so for someone who's sitting there, playing on their, computer tonight reading Callahan or wherever they're getting that Exhibit 500, they're thinking that this was a part of the case to convict him, which it can't be.
no. And this is the thing. I remember when Exhibit 500 was gotten by the westmemphis3.org. Okay. And there was another set of people, that the nons, they were the funding, just like the westmemphis3.org had founders, the nons had founders too.
Mm-hmm.
And they also had a copy of Exhibit 500. And I was one of the people that spoke up against Exhibit 500 not being made public, because it is sensitive. There's a lot of sensitive family history in in those documents about Damien's sister, and Damien himself. That was, again, not evidence used to convict him. It was only ever used during the sentencing phase. And I thought it should never have been made public, because I didn't think that people will, I just thought it was too personal, and I didn't think it should be made public. Obviously, I didn't win that argument because it's very much public. But I think if you're going to read it, you should understand. I didn't read it alone. My partner on this channel, Dr. B, she is a psychologist, and she read it. We read it together, and I asked her questions, and we covered it on the channel together, because I'm not qualified to treat or diagnose anybody. And I can look at evidence, and I can read the medical reports only because I know medical terminology, because I
Mm-hmm.
went to school to be a medical billing encoder. But that doesn't mean that I could walk into a hospital and start performing operations, or hell, even just go into the ER and listen to somebody talk about what was wrong with them and diagnose them. That's knowing medical terminology is not the same thing. And I think that people don't really understand that document and what they're reading in all those documents, because it's 500 it's called 500 for a reason. It's literally 500 pages. Very, very clever name for what it is, but that's why it's called Exhibit 500. Not because there were 500 exhibits, but because there were more than that, or not that much, but because there were 500 pages. I wanted to answer Davi really quick.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that Jason knew that Damien filed, or his team filed, a
Mm-hmm.
petition the court. Obviously, he would know about that, because it was, first of all, it's part of public record. If he wanted to access, he could, but also because Damien tweeted about it quite frequently. What I'm saying, he didn't need Damien's permission, but they were tried together. The trial was one trial. It wasn't Damien had a trial and Jason had a trial. And I think that the more resources, the better. And that had Jason been consulted and asked to sign on and be a part of the filing, meaning it be filed as both of their names as petitioners, Jason's team may have had a different approach, and the results may have it's very possible that we could have seen the same results where they were denied testing. But it's also possible, and you have to entertain this possibility, that his team could have brought something else to the table that maybe would have gotten the testing done. But we will never know, because Jason wasn't asked. And everything, all of the other filings were done together. I mean, they did have some things that were a little bit different, because obviously Damien's appeals are automatic, and he has access to different kinds of appeals, being that he was on death row. But their cases were together, And even during the appeals process, they were, for the most part, together. So I think that that's my point, is I didn't understand that.
You know, Jen, I don't understand it either because obviously I haven't asked. There might be some strategy in only one of them doing it. I'm not aware of it. I will say this, though. I don't think there was any way that judge was going to rule any differently. And I told their team the night before that I was very pessimistic because for whatever reason, that court has been, even though they've done these things together, like you said, they've been denied at every single juncture in that court from the beginning of this case to this moment right now.
I
There's
don't know.
It's kind of like we were talking about, you know, like the perceived rowdiness of the crowd outside and all that other stuff too. Most of the people that were there were people I've seen at a lot of other hearings, and
Right.
I think.
But remember, I told you there was a separate campaign going on social media.
Oh yeah,
I think that
I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
Which is funny. I wasn't aware of it till I got there.
Right. Yeah.
But
yeah.
It was definitely there, and I from our conversation earlier, I understand what you're saying, but
yeah,
I see from my perspective, I've seen the same dog and pony show at every other hearing I've been at since I've been involved in this case. I've seen the overt, police presence, the judge going to come in, and when everything looks like it should go one way, the judge comes in and finds some little sliver, like it's almost like there's an ocean of truth and there's this sliver of the case they want to make, and they jump on that and they go through this whole ocean of truth and they get where they want to go.
Right.
And I'm just like, now the police presence was a little more over the top, and I did mention that to you, like I thought.
Yeah.
Because it was more over the top than I think most people who were there realized, because I left for a while. I just got in my car because they weren't letting anybody sit in their car in the parking lot.
Right.
So it's 100 degrees outside. Everybody's having to stand out by the street, which is ridiculous. Even though your car's in the parking lot, they wouldn't let anybody sit there. So I was like, well, screw this. I'm not staying out here. So I got my car and I drove around like the neighborhood. There were cars, police cars in adjacent neighborhoods all the way around this courthouse. And you couldn't see them unless you drove down the street.
Because I don't think there's ever been a presence like of that magnitude that I've seen, other than when Damien, Jason, and Jesse were arraigned and then transferred because it's in Paradise Lost. And you see that scene out front, and
it was worse than that.
Wow.
It was worse. No, it was ridiculous. I even told one cop, and he kind of laughed. I was joking around with one of those guys. I said, so are you guys getting ready like for Russia? Are they done invading Ukraine? Are they coming to West Memphis now? What is this?
What's happening?
They had guys in almost like full riot gear. They didn't have the masks on or anything like that. But these guys were like decked out like somebody was going to.
I feel bad for them being out there in that heat like that. That had to be miserable.
And you know what else is funny? So we get up to the doors to go in the courtroom, and none of the officers are wearing masks.
Right.
No one in the courtroom is wearing masks. No one walking into the courthouse is wearing a mask. They said anybody who wanted to sit in on the hearing had to wear a mask. And of course, half the people there didn't even have a mask on them.
Yeah, I had heard that. So after the hearing happened, Damien did a live on his YouTube channel.
Okay.
Now, I don't think Damien typically does this. So when he goes live, he actually doesn't do it. He streams through YouTube, but it is to Patreon. And then he puts that video out on YouTube later for everybody. So it seemed to me that that's what this was. But he talked about it, and he talked about the masks, but I also had Daphne Blake on, and they were in the courtroom also.
Oh, okay.
And they had masks because they said that it was known that the judge was going to require the masks, which they're supporters. And so this is what I think about all of it. I think that Damien is, and rightly so used to being treated poorly by the system in West Memphis, by the state of Arkansas, period, because it even in prison, that I think that some of the slights that he perceived to have happened, I don't think he's outright lying. What I think is it's a perception, and I think he felt slighted,
Yeah.
like with Lori, for example, because he
Yeah.
talked about Lori. And the fact of the matter is, I understand that Lori is very important to Damien, and I don't fault him for that. They're married, but she's
Yeah.
not counsel, so she wouldn't be allowed to sit at the
No.
counsel table. But to
No, you're
say
right
that
about
that was a
that.
slight, you know what I'm saying? And yes, Daphne Blake was in there with George Byers, Mark Byers' brother. So
Hmm.
I think that's some of it.
So I probably saw Daphne walk in
You
there.
probably did. You probably did. But I think it was, some of it was a perceived slight that I don't think was an actual slight. And I will say this. He'd made a comment about the air conditioning being turned way down. Okay, you were there. I've seen pictures. You saw how Damien was dressed. That is not
Yeah.
summertime. That is not June in Arkansas weather attire. Sorry, it's not. It's not even about the coloring. It's about the long sleeves and all of that, which I get why he was doing that, because he was covering the tattoos to be for court. That's proper court etiquette. But it would make you hot. It would, I live in Florida, but I'm from Texas. I know Arkansas and Texas have the same weather, and I
What
know what
part of
it
Texas are
is.
you from?
The Dallas Fort Worth area.
Okay. I was born in Lubbock.
Oh, were you?
Yeah.
I grew up in Arlington,
Okay.
Texas. Yep. So I'm a Texas girl. So yeah, I mean, but when I saw his outfit, and then he said that that the judge had turned the AC down, I was thinking in my brain, I think you're mispronouncing thank you, because it was hotter than nine kinds of hell. It's June in Arkansas. It's hot. It's like hot. It's hot here in Florida, and I'm on the Gulf
It
Coast.
was 98 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Okay, see, that is disrespectfully hot. So
Yeah.
if the judge was kind enough to turn the AC down to 65, I would have been like, "Thank you, Your Honor."
Yeah.
I think that he's yeah, he's coming. I think every time he has to go into a courtroom with respect to this case, it's traumatic all over again. I can't. He's got to have PTSD. He does.
Oh
And
yeah,
so
no,
for him,
he's. I've actually done a story with him about that, about
I believe
what
it.
he went through. It was funny when we were standing there getting ready to go in the courtroom. I was standing with him and we were
Yeah.
talking, and I said, I bet you didn't realize this. This is the first time your feet have been in West Memphis, Arkansas, since the day you were arrested.
Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
said, you know what? He says, you're right, because he had driven through there like on the interstate past West
Yes.
Memphis to get out of there, but he had never actually set foot on the soil of West Memphis since this whole thing started until
Yeah.
that day.
I think the last time he would have been in West Memphis, Arkansas would have been at his arraignment,
Yeah.
because then they moved him, and they
Moved him to
moved
the
him to
Craighead County Detention Center, which is in
yeah,
Jonesboro. And
yeah,
then from there, he went to death row.
right, yeah.
And
So shit.
he would have driven through there like the day they got released. He and Jason left with Eddie Vedder. And this is funny. Um, Eddie Vedder was in the courtroom when they got released.
Yes.
And getting in there, they weren't going to let anybody in there. Like, they were only going to let family of both, the victims and the
Right.
three guys. That's all that was going to get in. There was a really small courtroom. And then they were going to let 20 journalists in. And I was one of the 20 that they let in. And I get in there and I look over and I see Natalie Maines and Eddie Vedder sitting next to each other. And I'm like, I walk over to him. I'm like, you're not related to anybody in here.
Yeah. How'd you get in?
And he looked at me and he goes, because I talked to him before, in relation to this case. I actually talked to Natalie Maines too. And he said, well, I think I've probably done more than most of their family members to try to get him out of here. And I said, well, you do have a point there.
Yeah. I mean, so that's why I find it like, so I covered the Depp Heard trial, because I've never covered a civil case before, and I learned so much about a defamation lawsuit from that trial. I mean, it was a fascinating from that aspect, not the details, but just to learn about courtroom procedure in a civil trial. I've never watched a civil trial before. I was fascinated by it. And all I kept thinking about was when Amber made all of the claims about Johnny Depp, is that's just not the person that I know, and I don't even know him, but media that I know him to be. From what I've seen, that he's just seems so kind and so generous. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think the other element that people don't think of when they talk about Hollywood with respect to this case is that think about what they were trying to do here. These are three teenagers convicted of the brutal killing of three 8-year-old second graders.
Mm-hmm.
That's a risk. I mean, do you know how many times I've been called a supporter who is I support three child R-ing, murdering bastards? Do you know how many? I mean, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a mom myself. You really think that I would be voicing my opinion so vehemently and loudly if I hadn't researched this case? Like, you think I want to be called that? You think I don't? You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
for them to get for Natalie Maines, for Johnny Depp, it would have been a personal risk for their careers, and yet they still did it.
Yeah. No. And along those lines, and I'm probably gonna have to go here because I've got
Yeah.
a. It's been really
It's late.
wonderful talking with you guys,
I
but
know, you've been great. You gotta come back. We're gonna have to do a part 2 for sure.
I will. And I have another case that if you want to talk about it sometime, it was actually
Yes.
profiled on the Confession Killer.
Oh, was it?
It was the Deborah Sue Williamson murder case,
Okay. Okay.
and we've done some extensive work on that case, and
Absolutely.
it's the case where Henry Lee Lucas confessed all those, and he
Yeah.
confessed to her murder, but that was the one you saw her mom,
Yes.
and that was the one where the mom said no, and the stepdad said no, you didn't kill our daughter, and they proved that he didn't do it, and that's when that whole house of cards came collapsing down.
Right. Is that the one with the socks?
No, that was in Oklahoma, but she
Okay.
was still
Okay.
connecting that. If you
Okay.
go back and watch the confession, you'll remember because the mother and the sister were in several episodes,
Okay. Okay. I'm
and
gonna have to go back and watch it again because it's been a minute. So I'll go back and watch for sure.
yeah, you should see what we came up with on that
Yes, I
case.
would love to. I love covering true crime, and I love to cover I stay away from covering current active cases because I find, and I'm sure it's maybe different for you because you're like an actual journalist, but here on YouTube, it's a very fine line between covering a case and inadvertently interjecting yourself in the case by, like, you
Yeah.
want to cover it, so you're reaching out to, like, say it's a missing child, so you're reaching out to the family. A good example of that case would be the Summer Wells case, where
Hmm.
Dawn and Candace Wells have been all over on a ton of YouTube channels, right? And I think it's difficult to remain objective and not inadvertently interject yourself into the investigation. And I always think long term, like, towards the prosecution, to the prosecuting time. I don't want to ever do anything by covering a case that results in it not being able to be prosecuted. So that's how I would much rather do, like, a colder case, and
Yeah.
like that. Those are fascinating to me, especially because it, the advances in technology, like, right there's about do you remember it happened here in Florida? They call it the clown killer, the
Oh
woman
yeah.
that yeah, that's about to come to trial after what,
Yep.
30 years, 30
Yeah.
years.
Well, I'll give you a tease. We
Yes.
spent a year investigating this case. We tracked down everybody in Texas, Missouri. We traveled to these states. My investigative partner and I. We tracked down everybody connected to this case that was still alive that we could find,
Wow.
and it culminated with my partner one night. Her and another woman walked into a bar, and they took a card with the murdered girl's picture on it.
Uh-huh.
And one of the guys that we talked to, he was a suspect in the case. He was sitting there watching a basketball game. He gets up to go to the bathroom. She goes over and sticks the card on his phone and walks out.
Wow. See?
And I interviewed him because he called me over a podcast episode. He would not talk to me. He ran from me, avoided me like the plague. I've got a cell phone number. I went to his work, would not talk, took off, like gone.
Wow.
But then I had an idea about a podcast episode where I speculated there might be some DNA that was in the house. And this is from 1975.
Wow.
That joker called me the next day.
See, that's what I like. I like cases like that. That's the case. So absolutely, we definitely will have to do multiple rounds to cover, not just because I'm not just interested in the West Memphis Street. This is the case that stole my soul. This is the very first case that I ever got invested or looked into for this long at this level, and it has a piece of my soul, and I want to see those boys get justice. I do. That's my ultimate goal, but I can't always focus on just this one case. So I love to talk about true crime. You are always welcome here anytime you want to come back about any case. I don't even care. This was a great conversation. Thank you so much. So much. I appreciate it.
Jen, you are very welcome. I really enjoyed it. You have a perfect voice for this type of work, just so you know.
Oh, thank you.
You do. You have a very, it's soothing, and it's like, my dad has, like I've always told him, my dad has a great radio voice. Like you could listen to him on the radio and you would just love listening to whatever he has to say, except for when he's talking to me because he's telling me all sorts of stuff that I'm doing wrong. So.
Right. Well, he's your dad. My kids would say the same thing. They're like, nope, you guys are really sitting and listening to my mom. No, nobody wants to listen to my mom.
I'm telling you, I've gone to book signings and people be like, "Oh man, so are your kids impressed with you?" I said, "No, of all humans on the face of the earth, I am the person they are least impressed with."
Yes,
so.
me too. My kids will be like, because they're all, the older three are millennials, and the joke is, the millennials are responsible for cancel culture. So every once in a while, we'll be talking about something, and they'll remind me, we could get you canceled, please. That's what they do to me. They're not impressed. Although I will say, when I hit 1,000 subscribers, they were proud of me. Not impressed, but proud.
Well, yeah, you should be proud of that.
Yeah, I was proud of that, but they were, and every so often they'll click on one of the videos I did and be like, "Mom, that was a really good video. You did some really good editing there." So it comes, but they're not as, impressed with me. That's why I never want to turn my camera on, because I always joke and say that I have a face for radio. I'm not actually an attractive chick, but I never turn my camera on because
no, Jen, I tell people all the time I have a face for print media. That's why I've always been in print.
You do not at all. Not at all. Not at all. This was such a great interview. Thank you so much. George, this was great. I had so much fun. So much.
I very much enjoyed it, and I will definitely come back. I've got a whole bunch of cases we can talk about.
Yes, and send me the links, and I'm absolutely interested in those cases. I definitely want to cover them, and I want to read your stuff too that you did on your interviews and stuff. I need a link to your podcast too, and I'll put it in the description after we get off of here so people can go listen to it. I'll promote you over here. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I very much appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys all for listening and your great questions. And I'm sorry I wasn't as interactive with the chat, but I was interacting with George and he did such a great job. And we had such a great conversation. Thank you all for being here so much. You stay there. I'm going to end this, and I'll see you guys, I don't know, tomorrow night. I owe Max 2002 a makeup because I just now understood her question from yesterday. So I'll have to do that for her. But you stay there, George, and I'm going to end this. Good night, you guys. Thanks for being here. Bye.